Us to gather here today. Thank you for keeping us safe. Please be with our families back home, and please continue to share your wisdom with us so we can do good things for the people of Georgia. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Amen. Amen. This is going to be a busy afternoon. It's a hearing only on House Bill 1464. We will receive public input on this bill today. Now, right now we have 40, maybe 45. With Zoom, 47, that's 50 individuals who wish to speak to the measure. So we're glad you're here. Let's make sure we understand a few ground rules. Number one, identify yourself and your organization. Number two, indicate whether you support or oppose the bill. Number three, make your comments specific. If you have a concern about a particular section or a particular line or a particular area, be very specific. Generalities. If you oppose the bill, that's all you need to say, unless you have specifics to go with that. 3 minutes maximum. And I will call at least two people in advance. We have at least one at the podium and two ready to go, because otherwise we'll be here till midnight. Okay. And I do need to try to be as brief and as succinct as possible. I know we have a number of election officials here from various counties. Is that right? Thank you for coming. We welcome your input. We appreciate it. We'll take that input in verbal form or in written form or both. All right. If you have a group and you all wish to speak to the measure, we welcome that. However, in the essence of time, you might choose to identify someone to represent your positions, and then others can certainly go on record and make any comments about that in support of those comments or in support of that particular individual. From a standpoint of I want you to know we'll take 1 hour of input in person, then we'll take Zoom input. I believe we have 8 individuals or 8 organizations on Zoom. We'll take Zoom input in about an hour, and then we'll come back and try to wrap up in-person input. So that's kind of the objective for the afternoon. I would say for the committee, certainly you're welcome to ask questions of those who testify. I'd ask that you just be brief and be focused in those comments. We will take no action today. We'll take no action on HB 1464 today. So we're going to begin with public testimony, and I'm going to call out the first 3 individuals who will be presenting their input. And again, if one of you would come, the first person come in, Vasu, help me with your last name, please. Abhiraman. I knew that was it. Vasu Abhiraman. All right. And then second, we're so glad to have Miss Battles back. Cindy Battles, as you know, missed the meeting last time, lost her perfect attendance, and then Liz Troop. So those are the first 3 individuals to testify. Thank you. Mr. Abhiraman. I missed it. Did I correctly mispronounce that name? I know I did. I'm sorry. Okay. Please provide your input.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chairman Burns, esteemed members of the committee. My name is Vasu Abhiraman, Senior Policy Counsel at the ACLU of Georgia, also a Georgia native, and at this point, an experienced poll worker with the new voting system. I've worked 6 to 10 elections at this point and have checked in thousands of voters personally. With this bill, a larger point to make is that elections administration at this point should be just as important as elections integrity. Efficient election administration that doesn't overburden counties in order to mollify folks in our state who don't truly understand the process. We don't think that that is the correct approach. So let's all go for relieving the burden on counties and efficient election administration. And with that, I have a couple of things to point out in this bill. One is the chain of custody provision and how it interacts with, sure, section 12, lines 745 to 752. This is within the chain of custody provisions. I wanted to point out a possible inconsistency here where it says no ballots shall be handled without a poll official being present. And then on line 752, it says such forms shall remain with the ballots until the ballots are destroyed in accordance with the law. This may not be compatible with the provision that attempts to make open records out of ballots after they're delivered to the clerk of the Superior Court. The ballots are only destroyed 24 months after they're delivered to the clerk of the Superior Court, in which case they would be handled by folks who aren't the folks that we think of as poll officials. So we think that that provision may be inconsistently written. On the chain of custody provision, let's just try to relieve the burden on county officials. Chain of custody is important. I think most responsible county administrators are already executing chain of custody pretty well. What we would recommend is exempt the blank sheets of paper from the chain of custody provisions. That's a bit of overkill there. And right now, county elections offices are struggling. They have a lot of job openings. They're offering the chain of custody. Oh, the blank sheets of paper. I don't have the line numbers for that part. I just more of a comment on the overall concept here. So hopefully that can be exempted, and then this technical possible glitch can be remediated. Couple of other things to observe. So with the funding provisions, hopefully in-kind donations can be exempted, including anything from a polling location being offered by a church to generators being offered to run polling locations after they lose power, as they did at the end of early vote in 2020. We would definitely recommend that. In the affording employees time off to vote, that's in section 9. What we would recommend is that language about jury duty, which is in code section 3413A, be used in this code section. So where in jury duty in the law, it says employers can't discharge discipline. All right. Fair enough. Fair enough. Thank you for taking my input.
Oh, I can do this. Thank you, Chairman Burns, members of the committee. As many of you have already heard from us, I am going to talk about a few issues that we have specifically with this bill. Let's start with section 16, starting on lines 874. The issue with the current language is that it leaves the idea that the election could, the certification could be delayed. And so what we are suggesting is that there is language included in that section that makes it very clear that auditing of the ballots or observation of the ballots does not in any way interfere with certification. In case anybody is concerned about those things, I have answers for questions on that. Section 10, line 682 and line 687, changing meaningfully to fairly to meaningfully is very vague and sets up an unrealistic expectation for poll observers in which they're going to be expecting something that they are not going to get, and leaves election observer and leaves election officials open to harassment in situations that we are trying to protect them from. Section 4, lines 110 to 117. This language that says that we're going to take out, that we're going to subtract the number of voters who have already voted, as well as inactive voters, because current code allows election officials to subtract the number of inactive voters. So if you do both of those, what you're going to do if you have a higher turnout than normal is look at the idea that you're not going to have enough voting machines. And if you subtract that number of people, in some areas, you could have polling locations that have one voting machine for all of their voters. So we believe that SB 202 has already reduced the number of machines per voters, and honestly, we would just strike this entire section. And last but not least, because I am going really fast, I'm so super sorry. Sections 1 and 2, lines 42 through 83. This whole idea of funding and what you're doing to county elections. There are so many unfunded mandates being passed by this body. You are not giving county election officials the budget that they need to run their elections, and then you are making it more difficult for them to get what they need. The state election board is already working on a system so that they can have funding and it can be dispersed in an equitable fashion. There is no need for this. I do know that we are really all worried about election integrity and confidence in elections. So I say we take time to get this right, because the more times we have to come back and clean up language and clean up language and clean up language, then at some point, voters are not going to trust not only just their election officials, but the people in this body making these laws. That is all I have. I'm open for any questions.
Wait a minute. There it goes. Perfect timing. I recognize the minority leader for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Cindy, for always being here to enlighten us on election laws. I do have a question on the last point you were making about the State Elections Board.
Yes, ma'am.
Right now, they're trying to work out a process to implement the Senate Bill 202 restrictions on funding.
Yes, ma'am.
So would it not make sense if we would wait for them to finish that process before we put in more restrictions in this bill?
I absolutely think so, because SB 202, which this body believes is a very good bill, and some of us may have disagreements on that, but it is now law, and it gives the state election board the governance that it needs to make sure that the counties are coming up with a process. So making this law before you've seen what they're going to do is sort of that cart before the horse, I believe it's the way my grandma used to put it.
I think that's the way it sounds. I have a couple other questions. They're short.
Very brief, please.
I'll keep them brief. In section 4, there are a bunch of questions I could ask in that, but I do want to know when and how, well, we may know how, but when are the elections officials or workers supposed to know when people haven't cast their ballots? What time of day do they get to count these people that have not cast ballots?
I mean, at some point they are keeping up with how many absentee ballots and that kind of thing. But what you're talking about is not just having an idea of how many people have voted, but an exact count. Because if you're not really careful, you could be in violation of HABA. Right? If you make the wrong count. So again, this is one of those sections where we are unnecessarily burdening election officials by telling them that they have to keep up with this.
Okay, one more.
Okay.
In section 1, I think in the last committee meeting, there was some question about how many days that the election is certified for the county and for the Secretary of State's office. Do you know those numbers?
So Mr. Germany is also here, so I'm a little nervous to get this wrong. If I do, I'm sure when he comes up, he'll correct me. But I believe it's 10 days for the counties to certify and 10 days after the election for counties to certify and 17 days after the election for the Secretary of State to certify.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Chairman.
Chair recognizes Senator Huachin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Battles, thanks for being here today. And I just wanted to address something you said earlier about section 4, lines 114 through I guess it's line 116 and 117.
Mhm.
The addition of who have not yet cast a ballot in the current election, that's not a requirement that they have to lessen the number of machines that are available. It's just saying that if they do know how many people have voted, they don't have to have one machine per 250 people in the that are registered to vote. So are you saying that that's a burden on the poll workers?
I'm saying if they choose to do that, it would definitely be burdensome but again, if it's something they feel like doing. But what happens, Senator Hatchett, when they feel like doing that, and then the voters go to the polling location and there's one voting machine? And some of the Board of Election folks are here. They're going to disagree with me. I've already talked to one of them. But again, what happens in this situation where you've got 2018 line, yeah, everybody remembers 2018, right? Because I was in Southwest Georgia. I very clearly remember 2018, what the lines looked like. Think about what we saw in 2018 and the difference in 2020 when we had historic turnout and average wait time was 20 minutes or less. That's what I'm trying to say. If I am a single mom, and we all love stories about single mothers here, and I need to go home and feed my kids and help them with their homework, and I show up to a polling location where there's one machine and a line, I leave. I don't cast my ballot because my priority is my children. I'm just trying to avoid that.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Battles. We appreciate your input. Liz Troop. And then after that, Joseph Clerk. Ms. Troop, thank you for coming.
Hi, thank you. I'm Liz Troop. I live on Clifton Road in Atlanta. I'm going to speak to problems I see with Section 18.
Okay, Section 18.
This bill adds broad new investigative powers to the GBI that cover not just voter fraud, but all election matters, from candidate qualification to polling place arrangement. It adds these powers while leaving intact the investigative powers and obligations of the Secretary of State and the State Election Board. It also leaves the AG's election complaint portal in place. Ordinary citizens who have issues with voting should know where to report problems, and the accused deserve to know which agency will investigate them. More fundamentally, 1464 doesn't help the GBI, the SOS, and the SEB divide up responsibilities. The SOS office will still have to maintain its dozens of investigators, and the SEB is still charged under 21-231-5 to investigate or authorize the SOS to investigate the administration of election laws and frauds and to report violations. Overlapping jurisdictions would create disputes when these entities come to differing conclusions. Duplicated efforts would waste millions in taxpayer dollars. Yet there's no fiscal note for this significant expenditure. On top of this costly GBI provision, the bill significantly impacts county expenses with its requirements for blank paper accounting and its effective elimination of grants. Senators should be very wary of these unnecessary costs and should require a fiscal note before consideration. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you. We appreciate your input. Mr. Kirk, Joseph Kirk, and then Mr. Joel Nat. Mr. Kirk.
Thank you, Chairman. My name is Joseph Kirk. I'm the election supervisor from Bartow County, as well as the treasurer of the Georgia Association of Voter Registrars and Election Officials. First, I wanted to thank y'all for delaying this hearing to give us a chance to be heard after our conference. Thank you very much. We can't take a stance as an organization yet, but I am here with a few of my members to give comments specifically about the administration portions of this bill, not some of the other things in there. The other thing I wanted to ask is we can't have a good conversation about these processes in 3 minutes or less. We have great members who can help with the process, who want to help, but we need a better opportunity to do that. I asked for a study committee at some point to look at these issues. We need good election reform. I would appreciate that opportunity. The part that I'm here to talk today about chain of custody, there are two kinds of security in elections. That there is real election security that we need, and there's security theater that helps. I'm not opposed to it, but all it really does is make folks feel better without accomplishing any good towards security of our elections, and this bill covers both. For example, in section 12, it talks about transporting ballots under seal and how we treat them when they're in secure areas. Having chain procedures in a secure authorized access only room is just security theater. It's not helping us secure those ballots. But once they leave that room, yes, we need those procedures. Any ballot's been voted and scanned has to be transported under seal with strong chain of custody. Same about the security paper, but other members are going to talk about that more. But again, chain of custody, for the sake of chain of custody, is not necessarily a good thing. So in section 8, it talks about having chain of custody for obviously by mail ballots. We already track who processes them, when they're processed, and store them in a secure area in a secure way. And we know exactly whose ballots we should have. That's just going to slow us down and take more resources that we need to dedicate to other things that really matter in the process. And we only have a finite number of resources. Or in another provision in section 8, paragraph H, it talks about sealing privacy envelopes while we're processing absentee ballots. So the idea would be to separate the envelopes. And while my team is still trying to count those ballots, taking the time to seal those ballots into a box, perform chain of custody on that box, seal the box, immediately unseal the box, fill out chain of custody paperwork again, and the same person take it right back out of the box, open it and continue processing it. Will take a lot more time on election night or during the days leading up to election. We need to be focused on getting the results and getting ready for election day. So again, we have access controlled areas. I would focus my efforts on those in the future, make sure every county has a good, secure space with video surveillance, with the proper procedures surrounding that. And I can't go line by line with everything here today, but I'll make myself available for whoever wants to talk about this. If you can't talk, I love talking about it. I'm always happy to chat. Before I leave, any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Kirk. I have a quick question. I appreciate Bartow County being here. We have about 8 other counties and I appreciate their input as well. Do you feel that every county in Georgia effectively follows Georgia law when it comes to election processes?
I can't speak for every county in Georgia, but what I will say is we have good laws on the books right now that we need to enforce, and the counties who are not rising to the occasion need to be held to account. But making those of us who are already doing what we need to do follow extra procedures and don't accomplish anything, I don't think is the answer.
Fine. I concur with you, by the way. Thank you. Any other questions? Chair recognizes Senator Roberts.
Thank you for being here. Now you're part of the association, is that right?
Yes, and I should note that because of our current bylaws and our processes, the views I say today are mine and not my association's, but I am a member of that association.
That's fine. But you're familiar with the association, correct?
Absolutely.
How many of the 159 election officials responsible for county elections are members of your association?
As I know, last year we had all time member or counties represented. I think this year there's 1 or 2 who are not, but I cannot tell you who they are. off the top of my head.
Do you know off the top of your head if the county of Fulton is part of your association?
It is.
Okay, thank you.
Recognize Senator Harold, Mike Ford.
Joseph Kirk, K-I-R-K.
And Bartow?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kirk. Joel Nat, the Forsyth County Board of Elections.
Good afternoon, Good afternoon, Chairman. My name is Joel Nat. I am the Vice Chairman of the Forsyth County Board of Elections. We have 172,000 registered voters. And Senator Gooch, who is not here today, is a representative of our county. Before you, first I want to thank you all for the good and the bad in the bill. There is good and bad. First off, one of the great things in the bill is in section 9. It's 21-2-404. It's on page 22 of the bill, lines 110 through 117, and the ability to expand the ability of an employer and an employee to work together to get 2 hours off from work to go vote on other days besides election day opens it up to all 17 or 18 days, depending on the county. That is a great ability for both sides to get people out and ensure our election integrity by having in-person voting. Now, the other thing is the little bad. I'm going to say this, it's in section 12. It's page 29 and 30, lines 753 through 763. And what you have before you here is a ream of 500 pieces of paper that I checked out of our elections training group. These are paper that was given to us for the 2020 election, that these are called secured ballots. Based on what is required of what you're putting, my county will have to put a minimum of 3 security stickers on each one of these packets once they have counted that it is 500 sheets that we've received from the elections. We'd have to verify that the 65-pound paperweight is. That means our delivery guy, before we sign for it, would have to wait for us to count every ream and every case. Remember, I said I have 172,000 registered voters. Think about how much paper I have to order for every election. That is a lot of counting. That is a lot of time and waste management. If we had time, I would ask the good senators if they had 2 aides that could demonstrate counting this and the procedures. It is not a menial task. If you were to ask us to count blank paper, you are going to waste time and you're going to cost me to lose poll workers. I have 400 poll workers that work for our board. That is 400 people that I could see telling me after May, have a nice life. And it's hard enough to keep them right now. So I appreciate your time. I appreciate everything else. There's more I would love to talk to, but I know I'm limited on time, Senator. So I will yield to questions.
Any questions? Chair recognizes.
I heard that very same expression, that very same issue that came from my own election supervisor in my home county.
Hall County.
Yes, very same comments. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator, I'm going to leave this here for a minute.
Certainly. Yeah, I suspect others might want to reference it. It's a good prop, but you got to make sure it's secure. We have Mr. Dexter Benning, and behind that is Miss
Yeah.
Anita Tucker. Mr. Benning, Benning or Banning? Benning? Benning, Mr. Benning, he's with the Bartow County Board of Elections, similar to Mr. Kirk. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Please.
Thank you, Senator, for having me this afternoon.
Thank you for your service.
And I'm also representing the Democratic Party, the state of Georgia Democratic Party as well. My comments are going to be brief. I just want to, and I'm from Bartow County. My name is Dexter Benning, and we have 75,000 voters in Bartow County. I'm referring to section 1 and 3. And we ask that that you exempt the in-kind of facilities from the community partnerships from the state election board review process described in this bill. These partnerships show that the community leaders support our office in very tangible ways at the time when we're working to rebuild the trust in our elections. So we have different organizations, whether it be Methodist Church, Baptist churches, or whatever, that donate their facility and they trust our elections process. And if a member of their church just happens to vote there and they're comfortable with voting there, we should not restrict voters from having that access to be able to vote at those types of facilities. So we're asking that you guys reconsider that and that we use that ability to build the trust within the community. And that's my comments.
Excellent. Thank you. Questions? Thank you very much.
Thanks, sir.
Ms. Anita Tucker with the Forsyth Board of Elections, and then Carly Swift. Ms. Swift first, Ms. Tucker.
Good afternoon. My name is Anita Tucker, and I'm with the Forsyth County Board of Elections. I was going to do some broad strokes, but I'm going to give you some details of why Section 12D is harmful. At the beginning of every early voting day and election day, all equipment counts are confirmed on chain of custody forms. Numerous times during the day, the poll work managers conduct an audit that compares the count of advanced voting application or election day voter certificates. That's the paper form that you get, that you fill out before you vote, to the number of voters marked in the state system or on the poll pads, again, depending on if it's an early voting day or election day. And then they are compared to the poll pads and the number of ballots printed by the touch screens, which are then compared to the numbers of actually scanned ballots. Totals are reported to the elections office by every open polling location every day. Discrepancies are investigated and recorded. Forms are then reviewed by the elections office every single night for every single poll that was open. At the end of each voting day, counts from the poll pads and election system, touch screens, and scanners are balanced. All information is recorded on chain of custody forms. There's no need to worry about blank paper. Does anybody have any questions?
Any questions for the witness? Again, a similar comment. Do you believe that every county in Georgia follows Georgia law when it comes to elections?
I have not visited every county, but I do know that I did go to Gavrio this year. I am, by the way, I've been on the board since March 1st of this year.
Good.
So I don't have a ton of experience. I have been a poll manager. I've been a poll worker. I worked in 2020, so I've been through the fire.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate your help. Appreciate your input. Ms. Swift, Carly Swift, and behind that is Kathy Woolard.
Good afternoon. My name is Carly Swift, and I'm a Georgia native, a Georgia dog, go dogs. But more importantly, I'm an at-large member on the DeKalb County Board of Voter Registrations and Elections. So we can all agree that as elected officials, it's your duty to support elections officials and leaders in the administration of fair and open elections. However, HB 1464 is a solution in search of a problem. Last year, this body passed a 98-page bill called SB 202. And if I recall, it was under the guise of fixing the election in Georgia. And you said you weren't going to do anything else this year related to elections, but that's changed. And now we have, you're considering HB 1464, which as I read it, has new items that may conflict and change what's in SB 202. And it actually makes elections less secure, and doesn't seem like you're listening to elections professionals and leaders at who administer the election. So let's start there first. In sections 1 and 2, you create multiple unfunded mandates, and at the same time, you cut off election boards' ability to obtain funding. Now, some of your colleagues say that you point to outside partisan funding, but in reality, counties across this state, including conservative counties, receive third-party funds. Maybe you're not aware of this, but Cherokee County receives over $700,000. Hall County received over $1 million to administer elections from the same organizations as quote unquote liberal counties in the state of Georgia. That funding was needed to meet budget deficits, and that was before you implemented these new unfunded mandates. Now, I'm not aware of any additional funding that this body has given to local elections boards, the state elections board, or the state or the Secretary of State's office. So we need to consider how these unfunded mandates are going to affect our ability to administer the elections. It's unclear if you see that this could cause some failures across the state. Second, this bill does not consider the logistics of administering elections. It's clear from those of us who are officials, who are administrators of the elections, that you guys haven't administered elections, because if you did, you would know that there are already significant chain of custody procedures in place. There is no benefit, for example, to counting blank paper unless you want to create opportunities for human error and discrepancies. Again, do you want us to fail when we administer the elections? Finally, there is no purpose to giving the Georgia Bureau of Investigations new powers unless your goal is to create sham partisan investigations. The State Board of Elections and the Secretary of State are already able to investigate elections issues. And as you know, they can already involve the GBI when needed.
Thank you.
The proposed purpose
thank you
of
for
this
your
bill,
input.
can I finish this statement?
3 minutes.
Is
3
giving the
minutes.
GBI additional investigative,
3 minutes.
coupled with the unsealing the ballots, it's going to create problems.
I
okay?
apologize.
No problem.
But we've got like 40 people.
Absolutely.
And the chair
And I stand ready for
recognizes.
questions.
I have questions.
Mhm,
I have
sure.
questions.
Please, I'm
Senator,
ready for questions.
Senator Hatchett.
Number 14, Mr.
Thank
Chairman. Thank you. When you were speaking of unfunded mandates earlier, which unfunded mandates are you referring to in this bill?
Okay, so there are multiple. Should we go? And there are going to be multiple elections officials that are going to come through to discuss those. First of all, the additional paper that you're going to we have to count, which causes additional employee hours. Okay, so multiple. I'm the third person that's come here and talked about this random mandate to count blank paper. That makes no sense. The additional hours that we're going to need for these changes to the chain of custody procedures. And then a lot of this is we don't know, because we don't know how many hours it's going to take for personnel to deal with these potentially sham investigations. That's part of the problem, Senator Hatchett, is we don't know the impact because as I just heard, there isn't a fiscal note. So I think it's important that, and I asked this question at the Georgia Association of Voter Elections conference earlier this week as well from the Secretary of State's office. Where is the funding? Because it doesn't seem like you guys have looked into this either.
Very, very briefly. Thank you. I'll Chair recognizes Senator Robertson.
Yes, ma'am. And what did you say your role is?
I'm an at-large board member on the DeKalb County Board of Voter Registrations and Elections.
Okay, and I heard you say you guys a lot in your testimony. Now you do realize this is a House bill that's come over here to be vetted by the Senate, and that this is a hearing, right?
I do.
Okay, and so I'm sorry.
Well, fair.
Right. I think the vetting tied that up. So your role there in DeKalb County, the specific things that Senator Hatchett asked you about, are there specific lines that you have issues with, or is it just the entire piece of
Well,
legislation as a whole?
I oppose the entire legislation as a
Okay.
whole. However,
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I can certainly send you after this specifically what mandates would create additional funding. And I would suggest that as you vet the bill, you do the same thing.
Right. And
thank you.
and thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
Thank you.
Senator. Chair recognizes Senator Jones.
Thank
More
you, Mr.
questions.
Chair. I have two quick questions, and I think my the thing came off, but I have two quick questions. Number one, just for my own edification, these private groups that give money, how does that work? Is that through a grant process or something?
And again, that's a great question. I can't speak to every private group, but there were in several cases, there was a grant process where multiple counties across the state apply for grant funding, which is why counties across what would be considered political spectrums received funding from the same orgs. That's the way it was structured. Again, if we want more, again, I would say, it sounds like we need to be doing some more research. And I think there was an earlier comment about having a study committee. This is absolutely, I think it was Senator Hatchett or Senator Robertson who said, you're vetting the bill. You certainly are vetting the bill. And you have the opportunity to stop it, as I remember the legislative process and how it worked, but I could be wrong.
Follow up.
I have one other quick follow up briefly, because you had mentioned about sham investigations. Just give us that. What do you mean by that when you say it would invite sham investigations?
Absolutely.
I don't understand.
So you guys, you all may be aware of this, but 12 years ago, the GBI actually conducted a costly sham investigation into 12 people that had helped turn out Black voters in Brooks County. And so it showed sometimes that when those powers are expanded, again, the GBI is a great organization. We definitely need their support, but those powers already exist with the state elections board as well as Secretary of State. There is no need to have any additional powers. So the question is why? And we can only look at history of what has happened when these investigations have occurred in the elections context. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Kathy Woolard. Ms. Woolard. Ms. Woolard, thank you. While Ms. Woolard here? If not, Ms. Pat Pat Pilar. Thank you. As you come up, the chair would just like to point out, it's a very busy day, and around 5 o'clock, a number of our members have other committee commitments. So you're going to see committee members going in and out. We will not stop taking testimony, but I just want you to recognize not everyone will be able to hear your comments unless we move expeditiously. Chair recognizes Pro Tem.
You want to have someone on deck and somebody know?
Absolutely. That's what we've been trying to do.
Yeah.
Ms. Puller is next, and then Mr. Rocky Raffley, if you'll come up. Okay. Ms. Puller.
Good afternoon. Thank you for holding this hearing. My name is Pat Pilar, and I'm a Clayton County Board member. I have just a few concerns, and I would like to ditto the gentleman that spoke about Section 9 and thinking it is a good thing to allow people to go vote and get out of work to go vote. My concern is for the course of the legislation being heard today, HB 1464. First, the superior courts will be inundated with open record requests with no funding and no staff to conduct the insurmountable requests that are sure to come for this election cycle and beyond. Secondly, counting blank ballot paper serves no one. The very fact that it's blank even leads to paper being damaged to the point where it would have to be destroyed because the printer could possibly be damaged from torn or bent paper after it is counted. This is not regular paper. It must be specially ordered. Who will pay the cost for this? Finally, the same election process that we have used with updating of our processes throughout the years by our election officials and the Secretary of State staff is noted in these books. And I bring these books because this is how long that I've been involved with the Board of Elections. This is 2007 under Karen Handel, 2010 under Brian Kemp, 2016 under Brian Kemp, and now 2019 under Brad Raffensperger. In none of these books do we have the disenfranchising of voters. it really, these books help us to administer the election process in a fair and a transparent way. The same election process that we have used with updating our process throughout the years by our election officials and the Secretary of State, we have amended our absentee ballots to ensure that every legitimate vote gets counted. However, since the end of the 2020 election, there are legislators who have decided that elections are fraudulent. So do we question those same legislators and say they too were on the same ballots? However, they enjoyed success because they won their elections and are questioning the existing process by writing legislation that questions our election official staff and the counties they serve. Leaving the Georgia Association of Voter Registration and Election Officials Conference this last week, attendees were dismayed and disappointed that they spend hours and days conducting elections and now their work is being questioned. These workers are some of the lowest paid and most of them are seasonal. And during the 2020 election, we lost so many of our election officials from COVID, being unhappy with all of the long hours. And now we're adding more hours and more unfunded mandates that could possibly really make our election process in 2022 something that we don't want to view. And I'm finished with mine.
Thank you for your input. Chair recognizes the minority.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a quick question. With all of the additions from this bill, and you just mentioned you lost workers to COVID and other areas, would it be hard, you think, to hire and retain workers with all of this added burdensome?
Most certainly, because of who would put in a job listing for a person to just count paper when we have long lines at the election polling locations? It doesn't really make sense. We already have enough of the processes that we have had to train our staff across these counties, 159 counties, to adhere to SB 202. And I thought after SB 202, we would not have any more that we would have to retrain and re-educate even our voters. And so it really dismays me that we are now at this juncture when we do have these election processes, as I have listed before, and all the years and all the Secretary of States, and we have the processes in place. And when we do have glitches in our processes, we fix them. In 2018 and 2016, we had 234 reasons as to why we threw out absentee ballots.
Thank you. Thank you for your input. We're going to have to limit questions and responses to about a minute, or we will not be able to complete our work for the afternoon. Chair recognizes Rocky Rafley. Is that correct? And then next will be Catherine Maddox. Mr. Rafley.
Good afternoon. My name's actually Rocky Raffle.
Rocky Raffle, raffle, like
a
raffle,
ticket.
like a raffle ticket.
Yeah, make all the jokes you want.
That's
All right. Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the committee. I am the chairperson of the Athens Clark County Board of Elections, and I come today to speak against House Bill 1464. A lot of the things I'm going to say have already been said, but I will repeat them again. Sections 1 and 3 are full of unfunded mandates, as has been discussed previously, but there is no additional funding to fund those mandates. I know last year, Athens Clark County received $115,000 in funding to help us administer a free and fair election. And I believe that the counties should be able to make that determination, not the state election board deciding where the funds go. The second section is section 4. And it's about the machines constantly having to recalculate the number of machines. That's again an additional burden, an additional obstacle that we don't need to deal with. We need to have as many machines as possible. We need to have as short of lines as possible so everyone can vote. The third section that I want to speak on is section 7, 8, 11, and 12, the chain of custody. We've all had that, heard that discussion already. I'll just add that we're going to lose staff over this. In Athens, we already are barely making the minimum required number of staff to staff our polling locations. We had multiple elections last year. It's very hard to get these people to work, and a lot of them are of an older crowd. So again, we can't have that happening. And then this has not been spoken towards yet, and it's the sections 14, 15, and 16 in the unsealing of ballots at the clerk of court. And my concern in that is, again, it's another unfunded waste of taxpayer dollars, because it's not a burden on the boards of elections, but it will be a burden on the clerks of court office when it's just a rotating door of quote audits off the street. And then the final section that I wanted to speak against is sections 18 and 19, and that's the GBI piece that we've all been talking about. I just want to point out that in Athens, Clark County, we did have the unfortunate situation of a voter voting twice. And that case was referred to the state elections board, and they did their work. And then there is a process already in place to where that they, I'm not a lawyer, so it goes to the court or whatever. And that's it.
Yeah, since I keep hearing about this paper counting thing over and over again, I know if I counted that package of paper twice, I get two different answers. Can you speak to me about how, I assume that the counting thing is in the bill. I can't find it right now, but to make sure that none of this paper disappears, maybe that would be logical. I think that's maybe why it's in it. If I'm wrong, tell me differently. But what is already done to make sure that paper doesn't disappear?
So I'm the chair of the board. We act as the superintendent. So
you're
I
not
don't
an
do the actual
administrator.
work.
Yeah. Okay.
I believe some of our staff are here. And
Maybe
I'm-
somebody who's going to come up could address that for me
Yes.
later.
Yes.
Could you, I mean, this might be an unfunded mandate, but could you weigh that thing could you weigh it and instead of counting it?
If
you had an accurate
I'm not
enough
an
scale.
expert. I don't know if a tree is more dense than another.
There's
That affects the weight. I don't know. Is there?
There's somebody in the audience who has her hand up. Can she answer that question for me? Chairman, Mr. Chairman?
I would say that's an operational question, and we need to let the state election.
Okay, maybe somebody can address that who's coming. Also, Kathy Woolard has entered the room. Will you let her speak?
At the end.
Okay.
Okay, at the end, if she still chooses to. Remain.
Thank you. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Raff.
Mr. Raffle, yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We now will hear from Captain Maddox, and after that, the scene goes. By the way, Ms. Maddox will be the last person before we go to Zoom testimony. It's approaching 6 o'clock already. So if you would make your comment brief, if we go to Zoom input, and then oh, I'm sorry. But I said an hour to an hour. Feels like 6, doesn't it? Feels like 6 o'clock. I'm sorry. Ms. Maddox.
Good evening, everyone. I'll try and be as brief as everyone else did. So I am Catherine Maddox, and I'm a community advocate from Protect the Vote GA. So I'm here to talk about a couple of sections that we are in opposition to in the bill. The first one is, or that we would like for the committee to take a look at. The first one is section 9. We agree with the ACLU's position that we would like for employers to not penalize people who want to go vote, and that they could liken that to jury duty. I am worried that 2 hours off is not enough for a lot of people who don't live in their voter precinct, or who rather live in their voter precinct but do not work in their voter precinct and may or may not have transportation. The second part that we are greatly concerned about is section 18, where the GBI is given original jurisdiction. We don't really understand the need for that. According to one of the sponsors of the bill, no longer will the Secretary of State or any local authority have to give their permission for the GBI to investigate. And given that only 22% of the 1,339 suspected cases of double voting in the primaries of the summer of 2020, I don't really understand the need for that. It seems a little overzealous. And in the general elections, the double voting was actually rarer. And there was also already someone earlier in this committee hearing who talked about what happened in Quitman, Georgia, where 12 organizers, community organizers, were indicted for more than 100 election law violations, mainly due to a misunderstanding about them taking a voter's ballot to the mailbox for them. The results of that was that one defendant was tried. She went through 2 mistrials on 32 counts before a multiracial jury acquitted her the fall of 2014, I believe, on a stripped down list of 19 counts. One defendant died while under indictment. 3 defendants elected to the school board were suspended by Governor Nathan Deal in 2012, but all to be later reinstated. So it just seems like this was a waste of taxpayer money for the results to remain exactly the same, and that this investigation could have been done by someone else, and that all of the people under trial went through undue duress.
Thank you. I see no questions from the committee. Thank you, Ms. Maddox.
Thank you.
If we have Zoom capacity, do we have Zoom capacity right now to allow input from Stacy Ramirez?
Yes, hi. Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Ramirez.
Yes.
Thank you. You have 3 minutes, Ms. Ramirez.
3 minutes. Good evening, Chairperson. And esteemed committee, my name is Stacy Ramirez, and I'm a proud member and co-chair of a coalition called Rev Up Georgia. It's an acronym for Register, Educate, Vote, and Use Your Power. We've recently become part of the New Georgia Project Disability Rights Program. I come to you today to advocate alongside people with disabilities who do vote and want to be able to continue to vote. People with disabilities, like I said, do vote, and it's a good thing because I do want to share those statistics. As many as 25% of the general population and 40% of those over 65 have disabilities. People with disabilities make up 650,000 of our Georgia's electorate and of all political persuasions. I share that because we are in most need to be able to access the ballot. We have worked, Rev Up Georgia has worked over the past few years to make relations, build relationships with our local board of elections. As you've heard from many of our local board of elections, they know their community. We, as people with disabilities, have shared our issues with getting to the ballots, getting to the polling places with our local board of elections. We're worried about sections 1 and 3 of HB 1464 will further restrict the ability of people with disabilities to communicate with our local board of elections, for our local board of elections to support people with disabilities to do just that, exercise our right to vote. There's also a high concern with people in the coalition of Rev Up Georgia with the further banning of donations of food and water. It can literally be life-threatening for some people with disabilities. You and I, we never know simply by looking at someone if they have a disability. I can't be with you today because I had surgery on Thursday on my foot, or else I would be at that table right in front of you. A person may have a significant medical issue that makes that long line without a snack or food very dangerous, maybe even life-threatening. We know this to be true for people with diabetes, with heart and kidney disease, lupus, hypertension, seizures, multiple sclerosis, and even those taking certain prescription medicines, which leads us right to section 4. and the reduction of the voting machines. We have seen over time the ridiculous.
Thank you, Ms. Ramirez. We welcome your input. You're welcome to send the rest of your input via an email, okay? And be very specific about your recommendations.
Okay.
Out of respect for those of you who are in the room, we'll alternate between an in-person testimony and a Zoom testimony. Is that acceptable?
Yes, thank you.
All right, so we'll take Mr. Asim Javid. Mr. Asim Javid. Are you prepared? Thank you, sir. Mr. Javid, you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, Chairman Burns and members of the committee. My name is Asim Javed, and I'm a community organizer with the Georgia Muslim Voter Project, also known as JMVP. JMVP is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to elevating the Muslim, the immigrant, the POC voice through civic engagement, education, and voter registration within our communities. JMVP serves communities that have been underrepresented in our state for far too long. However, I can assure you that our communities are not apathetic, nor are we sitting idly by. In a thriving democracy, voting is considered both a right and a fundamental responsibility of each citizen. And as such, our access to the ballot should be as easy and as attainable as possible. Our communities turned out in record numbers in 2020 to ensure that our voices were being heard. And ever since, we've been punished for it through continued attempts at disenfranchisement by politicians. This bill, HB 1464, along with SB 202, which already reduced our access to the ballot, is another anti-voter bill which aims to threaten my community's access to the ballot. The passage of HB 1464 will cause voters to have to wait in long lines, make it more difficult for local election administrators to oversee elections, and even go so far as to intimidate voters away from polls. HB 1464 also enlarges the power of the Georgia Bureau of Investigations in prosecuting as well as intimidating voters and voting rights groups. These are all blatant attempts by Georgia politicians to undermine the voting power of voters of color just 2 months before a big primary election. As minority communities and community of colors are rapidly growing in and across Georgia, we demand and deserve equal representation in our state. Although you claim that the purpose of HB 1464 is to fix some of the issues seen with SB 202, this bill actually does much more harm than good and will be a detriment upon many communities in Georgia if passed. Not only will the passage of this bill force our communities to potentially endure long, arduous lines at the polls and vote on reduced number of machines, but it would also impact overworked election officials by reducing the amount of funding and donations they are able to take. And this will undoubtedly create trickle-down effects that will disproportionately impact voters of color throughout the state. Our communities deserve equal access to the polls without having to wait in lines at underfunding polling precincts or being intimidated by the GBI. As one of your constituents, I thank you for taking these appeals into consideration, and I urge you to not pass HB 1464 to ensure that our communities have equal and attainable access to the ballot box regardless of their circumstances. The ball is in your court, and thank you for your time.
Very well. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I see no questions, so we'll go to our next Zoom testimony from Karen Evans Daniel from the Macon-Bibb County Board of Elections. Ms. Evans Daniel, are you available?
I am. Good afternoon, Senator. Thank you for this opportunity. I want to discuss, first, my talking point is 1 and 3, which further tightens restrictions on third-party funding and food, water donations. I am from the Macon-Bibb Board of Elections. I will start serving as co-chair on the 31st. I have some of my students here with me. They're excited about listening. We want to ask you not to impose what would prohibit concerned citizens from donating water or food to workers or people in the lines. One of the reasons being, I come to you as a diabetic, and I have had several opportunities to vote prior to me working there, stood in long lines, and actually needed water when it was hot. So I'm asking that you not impose that. Also, we're in the middle of, or right at an election cycle, and we're trying to push these bills into law, which reduces the opportunity for the counties to comply with these and have workers, which is going to cost money. Most of our budgets are already done. Where's the funding coming from? Also reducing the minimum in section 4, reducing the minimum required election day voting machines. We talked about people who don't work in the precincts, in the areas in which they vote. We don't need to lessen the machines. We need to lessen the lines. Again, these are not fixes to SB 202. I see this costing more money. Also deterring voters from voting if there are long lines, and also costing more money for us to put workers in place. I don't know about the other counties, but here in Macon-Bibb, we're struggling with employees in our office as we speak. So with the amount that we're paying them, and also to points 18, sections 18 and 19, given the GBI jurisdiction to investigate all election issues, they have that ability in the past. If they need to, the state of, we have that ability. If we needed to involve GBI, we are able to do so when relevant. What is the purpose of giving them sole jurisdiction over investigations? Is one of the things I also have an issue with. I also heard the question about the ballot blank paper in section 7, 8, 11, and 12. What can we do with the paper? So I'm not understanding why we need to count the paper. Again, those are just a few points that I have, and I'm asking that we really reconsider, because these are not fixes to Senate Bill 202. It is only going to decrease the number of voters and disenfranchise us more than what we are now.
Thank you for your input. I see no question. I would like to make, I believe, a point of clarification. Any action, this bill would not go into effect until July 1, so it would not impact May elections. That is my understanding.
But even if it goes in July, the budgets are already done.
I appreciate your input. Thank you. We're going to go back inside. Giovanni Serrano, are you in the house? Did I mispronounce the name? I apologize. Giovanni Serrano, here you go. And then in the house, Louis Zaldavar, we will be after the next Zoom person. Mr. Serrano.
Good afternoon. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, thank you.
My name is Giovanni Serrano, and I am a community organizer with the Georgia Latino Alliance for Human Rights, GLAR. GLAR is a nonprofit community-based organization that educates, organizes, and empowers the Latinx community across Georgia to defend and advance the civil and human rights. SB 202 has already levied smart in Georgia elections, and just as we thought it could not get worse, HB 1464 wants to make it even harder to vote in our state. Under the name of opportunity, laws under local authority over election management, and erect extra barriers under section 1 and 3. Furthermore, local counties will be required to apply for resources meant for them already. Like we have to apply for resources that are already meant for them. The state elections board will be under no duty to fulfill their entity's intentions, meaning that a community will not be able to pull cash to keep polling sites open that its county otherwise could not afford, or to provide voters with food and water. For the past years, County Board of Elections have been fighting to remain afloat due to our government chronically underfunding Georgia's election systems. In addition, Section 1 and 3 failed to understand the diversity of our counties and their necessities by giving the state elections board the authority to continue diverting resources away from those counties that need it the most, with a false stance to distributing resources fairly and equitably. And I think, just asking everybody here just to vote against this bill. We think that with SB 202, our community members are, many of our votes have been more difficult to get out to vote and understand the different laws that are changing, and making these changes to now will make it even harder for our people to go out to vote in these elections coming up. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. Any questions? Thank you, Mr. Serrano. We're going to now go back to the Zoom. Nicola Hines. Ms. Hines, are you available?
Yes, I am. How are you?
Thank you. Please provide your testimony.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Nicola Hines. I'm the president of the Legal Women Voters of Atlanta Fulton County, and I'm speaking today on behalf of the Legal Women Voters of Georgia, which is our mission is to empower voters and defend democracy. LWVGA opposes House Bill 1464. But before I get into those issues of our proposed legislation, I want to remind the committee that the voters of Georgia haven't had a chance to digest and understand all the changes to the voting laws that were made last year with SB 202. And now Georgia voters and election administrators are now navigating all the changes brought about redistricting. But two of our main concerns for House Bill 1464 is Section 1-5C and Section 3G, which has extended restrictions on funding and potentially blocking at least $43.3 million in donations to counties to run a fair and funded elections, and adds language that all grant funds must go through the State Board of Elections application process to then be distributed as they see fit, which will make it tougher for local funding systems that are already struggling to support the current election cycles. We are also opposed Section 18-16, which will give the GBI Bureau of Investigation a redundant role that is already in the election review process and is a waste of taxpayers' money and time. This afternoon, we urge members of this committee to oppose House Bill 1464 and make sure that our county election officers and offices have all the resources they need to run a free, fair, and efficient election, not just for some voters, but for all voters of Georgia. Thank you so much, Chairperson. That's the end of my testimony statement.
Thank you, Ms. Hines. Any questions for the witness? Thank you very much. We appreciate your input. We're going to move now to Mr. Luis Zaldivar. Close enough? You can help me out. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Luis Zaldivar. You can also say Saldivar if you like. Zaldivar. I represent CASA. We are the biggest immigrant organization in the Mid-Atlantic, and we are new in Georgia. For the past 2 months, we're setting up offices to work here. I have been living in Georgia for the last 3 years, however, so I am also speaking on behalf of the people of the immigrant community that I have met in doing my work here. Our main concern, not only of CASA, but of the people that I have met doing immigrant outreach, is this subpoena power that this bill creates, because there's a lot of fear already in the community of people who recently became citizens and they are out trying to vote, but they might be afraid now of what will happen if a ballot is misplaced, or if somebody decides that they will be not trying to go around the rules and things like that. So most people that I've talked to are saying that they don't want to go to vote because they think that they will be targeted in some way by this bill, by these subpoena powers that are being provided. So I haven't had a time to work with our committees and our members to go more deeper into the issues here. So I'm just here to speak about, the fears that I hear in the community about this. I appreciate you all so much for your time. I hope to see you all and work with you in the next couple of years and make Georgia a great place for immigrants. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. We'll now go back to our Zoom. Kelly Robinson. Ms. Robinson, are you available?
Yes. How are you doing this afternoon?
Thank you. Please provide your input.
Yes. Greetings, everyone. My name is Kelly Robinson. I'm with the Newton County Board of Elections, where we serve 85,412 voters. I'm speaking in opposition to both Section 1 and 3 and Section 4. So my concerns are any restrictions on funding from third parties, grants, etc., would hinder our ability to serve the voters of our county with efficient voter services, particularly during high volume lines. We were able to use previously used funding to purchase equipment such as polling pads. These additional polling pads were instrumental in increasing our ability to check in voters efficiently. We reduced voter wait time, which of course should be the desire of us all, particularly when discussing processes that directly reflect or impact our voter lines. In addition, we utilize the funds to install security cameras in areas and facilities that did not have adequate security monitoring of our equipment in the voter precincts. It should be noted in a county like mine, and I'm sure others throughout Georgia, that without this funding, we would be substantially limited in our ability to utilize some facilities. as voter precincts without some type of funding to make some type of accommodation, such as installing security cameras so that these facilities would be in complete compliance, etc., to be able to utilize as precincts. In regard to section 4, the recalculations of how many voters who have not yet voted in order to anticipate machine requirements would be very time consuming and a very unproductive process. This process would require a never-ending matrix of voter equipment to voter precincts and endless variables of anticipated voter formulas. The removal of any voting equipment due to the number of people who have already voted maintains the high probability of long voter lines, which is counterintuitive to the function of providing voter services to our citizens. Finally, I would like to echo the other board election members who are having difficulty staffing with poll workers. HB 1464 would further strain our ability to attract and retain poll workers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Robinson. We'll go back inside. Bobby Paul, are you available? And then after the next Zoom person will be Vanyanti Joseph. Is that right? I apologize. Ms. Paul.
Hello. Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
indeed.
Thank you. I'm a volunteer. I live in Fulton County, one of the counties that's most disputed. I've been a resident of Georgia for 42 years. I have been involved at different levels. Basically, I've worked as the head of a women's nonprofit, a 501c3 from 2000 to 2013, doing education, registration, and mobilization. 2014, I left that position and I worked with Democratic candidates. Again, all volunteer, never been paid. Then in 2016, I worked as a troubleshooter for Fulton County with 4 counties across the state, specifically Burke, Tift, Effingham, and Walton County. I worked with the election supervisors to try to troubleshoot ahead of time any issues that might come up, so that if we had an issue, as we did in Walton County on first day of early voting, we knew who to call to get at the bottom of it. But it wasn't until 2020 when COVID hit that I really decided, I'm 72 and concerned about COVID, but I thought, I know there's going to be a hard time getting poll workers, so I want to help. So I worked on poll watching for early voting. I worked on election day, and I also worked for the runoff in January. So I was involved in all of that. As poll watcher, I did ballot curing, lots of different things. One of the things, because I didn't realize about all the bill and what we had to speak to, but
please address the issues of the
I
bill.
am telling you right now, one of the things you talked about was helping people. Okay, the last day I worked on the runoff, it was at Liberty Baptist Church. Before that was Fulton High School South Metropolitan Library. I was there and it was freezing and they had no heat. So I lived nearby. So I went home and I got a heater and I got blankets and I got wool socks for the poll workers, right? They couldn't have survived that day without it. Would I go to jail for that? Perhaps. But the main thing I worked on, and I think has been tossed about, and I think it's part of why everyone's talking about this as the big lie, is that I worked on the voter review panel. I didn't know that eventually I would get paid for this, as I should have, because I reported at 2:30 in the afternoon to work till 6:30 on November 15th, and I left at 6:30, but the next morning. We had to sit there and review ballots on computers, and I sat with a Republican, I being the Democrat, and we went through hundreds and hundreds of absentee ballots on these computers. We had guidelines that were very specific, drawn up on lawyers from both sides. We had a bevy of lawyers behind us. We had people watching everything we did constantly with masks, and this was at the warehouse. I also took part in the count at the center.
Thank you for your input.
And if you'd like to ask me questions about it, I'll tell you.
Questions? Thank you.
You're welcome.
We're going to go back to Zoom. Is it Dell Smith? Ms. Smith? DeKalb County Board of Elections.
Yes, thank you.
Dele.
It's Dele Loman Smith.
Thank you, Ms. Smith.
Thank you to the chair and committee members. I'm Dele Loman Smith, chair of the DeKalb County Board of Registration and Elections, where we have 560,000 active voters. And forgive me if I jump around just a tad. I'm trying to adapt as I hear other speakers addressing various issues. But there are, I think, two broad areas that I'd like to address. One is the overarching area that elections workers and poll workers need clarity and consistency in order to properly administer elections. And as you have heard from other witnesses today, we are still adapting to the changes that were passed with SB 202 last year. Even at the Gavrio conference earlier last week, there were questions that the Secretary of State was unable to answer with complete clarity because they're still working to understand and interpret some of the changes that were passed down. And so we have not even had the opportunity to implement those before more changes come down on us, which is going to severely affect our ability to do our jobs well. So that's the bigger picture, just overarching for this process. And some of the specifics that would be most helpful to provide you all, we have not been entirely able to provide because we were not consulted on this legislation. None of the elections officials around the state that I've spoken to had been consulted either. But in addition to that, we were at Gavrio. We have staff who are transitioning us from ENET to Jarvis. We've had redistricting. There are all sorts of things happening that have kept us from being able to really go through this legislation and give you all of the specifics. And so I'm concerned about surprises that are here and unintended consequences with this being rushed through without the input of the experts and the people with the responsibility to manage elections. To get more specifically to, it may have been Senator Harbison who asked about the grant process in sections 1 and 3, which a number of speakers have addressed. DeKalb County received $9.6 million in funding. A county employee outside of the Board of Elections was made or became aware of the grant opportunity and helped us to apply. And we were able to qualify for those funds, which we used to pay for security cameras, signage, labor costs, educational campaigns. So not having those dollars would actually reduce the credibility and effectiveness.
We welcome additional input. If you'd like to send some written input, we'll be happy to take that as we continue to review and accept input from a large number of folks, both here and online. We're going to move on now to in-person. Thank you, Ms. Smith. I appreciate your work. Thank you in DeKalb County. Is it Vianti Joseph? Vianti, Ms. Joseph, please. Thank you.
My name is Vianti Joseph, and I am the political director of the Asian American Advocacy Fund, an organization dedicated to building a politically conscious, engaged, and progressive Asian American base here in Georgia. I'm just going to be very brief. 2 points. Going into this crucial election cycle, we would just like to state we do not support this bill. However, I would like to extend our support for all those election workers and on the board who have stood here today to explain why. They do it much better than I could. This threatens their ability to fund vital services like language access and support for voters at the poll. We want our election workers to be able to do their job in the best way possible. And as they have said, this threatens that. They are working hard to prepare for unprecedented turnouts again, and this bill places undue pressure on their ability to do their jobs. The second part we would like to address is the unprecedented element of intimidation that appears at the polls by giving the GBI authority to investigate election workers and voters. You may believe it or not, but this is intimidation, and it will suppress only votes of communities of color. We work every day to ensure that the freedom to vote for everyone is intact, that our elections are fair and accessible. And this is not the way. We are already working with the restrictions and the new rules with SB 202 and getting used to that. And this is not the way we would like to see our elections move forward. So we would ask you to not move this forward.
Thank you for your input. Thank you for your input. We're going to now go back to Zoom. Omega Finney with the Henry County Board of Elections. Ms. Finney. Ms. Finney.
Yes.
Welcome.
Yes. Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. My name is Omega Finney, and I am a member of the Henry County Board of Elections and Registrar. Many of the witnesses have shared many of the same recommendations I have. I will reiterate several points. First, I would like to say that I agree with Section 9 and agree with the ACLU that the recommendation to liken it to jury duty so that employees will not be penalized for taking time off to vote. Again, in Section 1 and 3, with the would like to see to exempt the in-kind partnerships. We rely on relationships in churches for long-time polling places. We do not want to see those relationships severed, and also reiterate in-kind donations like a generator, water, food, things like that, just for the same reasons that other people have shared, because we have older people that may be in line, diabetics, things like that. And just to point out also in that section, lines 103 to 107, it specifically says that the state election board would have the sole discretion of the SEB, regardless of the intent of the donor, to make decision how the donation, grant, and gift should be used. And that's something I think I would ask that that legislation be looked at, because whoever makes that donation, if they intend for it to be used for water and food for voters, if the SEB decides that they don't want to use it that way, I think that's something that we really need, we ask that you look at. Also, I want to bring up in Section 10, and that's actually line number 682. It says meaningful access, and we ask that you define that. Right now, it's very ambiguous, and we would like to know, what does meaningful access mean? Also, I could just reiterate about the counting the security paper, the blank paper. The ballot paper cannot be used anywhere else. What can someone else use that ballot paper for other than for elections? And I think other witnesses have explained very well that there is chain of custody requirements already in place, and SB 202 added more chain of custody, so it's not needed. Also, sections 14 to 16, I just reiterate that it will be a burden on the clerk of court, and ballot images are already available online under SB 202. And then sections 18 to 19, there's already places.
Thank you,
okay.
Benny. Appreciate your input. Appreciate your service to the Henry County Board of Elections.
Thank you.
We'll come back with Isabel Otero with SPLC. Ms. Otero.
Hi, Chairman. Thank you for having me and giving me the opportunity to speak, and members of the committee. It's good to see you. So I am Isabel Otero. I'm the Policy Director for the SPLC Action Fund. In section 16, starting on lines 874, we think that this new process for in the name of transparency could cause additional disruption during the election certification process. And so we would ask that you all insert a new section that essentially says the inspection of ballots and other documents shall not be grounds to preclude the Secretary of State from complying with election deadlines, right? Or the governor from complying with election deadlines. We don't want this to be used in a way to cause disruption or for people to be making, claims that have zero evidence in order to delay or throw out an election. In section 10, lines 682 and 687, we agree that the meaningfully language could be really problematic and could cause additional harassment and issues at the polls. We agree with everything that's been said there, so I will leave it at that. But section 4, has to do with this is lines 110 to 117, where you are limiting, there's language limiting voting booths or voting machines. We think this is unnecessary, it's confusing, and it could cause unintended consequences. And so SB 202 already standardizes the language and allows the discretion of election officials to make appropriate adjustments. And so I'm happy to, read out or share that language from SB 202, but given that there's already some limits, you should sort of strike this section and let SB 202 say what it says. Alternatively, there could be some additional language added so that it doesn't cause the kind of delays and issues where you might end up with one precinct having one election machine in rural parts of the state. And then finally, sections 1 and 2, these are the sections that deal with the grants. We think, once again, this is not something that we need to do now. This is something that the state election board is doing during its rulemaking process based on SB 202's original language and the language that passed, which already sets boundaries on how, you are able to receive grant money. And so we think it's better for you all to let that process play out and work with them to make changes, as opposed to adding additional language that continues to limit how counties are able to get money. And I think the last point I will make very quickly is that the GBI issue, I think it should give us all a lot of pause to have a law enforcement agency that's so tied to the state executive that could be used in an intimidating way.
Thank you for your input. I have one question. You're concerned about the inspection of physical ballots delaying certification. Do you have any suggestions?
Yes, we have suggestions for language just to basically restate current law, right? Just restate the code sections that say what the deadlines are. And so essentially what it would say is just the inspection of a ballot and other documents pursuant to the code section cannot be the only reason, right? There has to be a much better reason to be delaying certification. And so I'm happy to provide you with that language.
Thank you. If you just share your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, right. Thank you.
Thank you.
For the record, Mr. Raffle also had signed up for a Zoom testimony. He testified in person. So we will move to Mark Putman from Voters of Tomorrow. Mr. Putman, are you available on Zoom, via Zoom?
Yeah, I am. Thank you for letting me speak. Sorry, I'm not driving. But I am in my car because there's no quiet place at work.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So I just like to say I'm Mark Putman, state advisor for Voters of Tomorrow. We're a group that really tries to help get young people and first-time voters out to the polls to do their civic duty. I'd like to state my opposition to this bill because of the aspect of voter intimidation and scaring away well-intentioned people from the polls. That's really my concern with section 18. During 2020, when I was trying to get as many of my friends, classmates, basically anyone that would listen to me to go out to vote, there's many different reasons for why they would say they didn't want to. And one of them was they did not know the process. There's vague guidelines on the Secretary of State website, and they're in some cases scared that they're going to slip up, make a mistake, and that can lead them to have the weight of a prosecutor just go after them. That is a valid concern. And when there's so much disinformation out there about how to vote in elections, it's very important that we make sure that a voter that is trying to follow the law, that is doing everything they think they need to do, they should not be targeted by GBI or any partisan bad actors who want to drag their name to the mud. So if I don't, that is really what I'd wanted to see with this bill. And I think this bill doesn't do that and does the opposite. And considering that there are a lot of vague guidelines, for example, for a college student, we do not know if we should vote at home or at college. That's not clarified anywhere. And with the vague residency requirements, it's really up to us. It is our decision, but most people don't know that. And most people will even challenge that if we bring that up. Because of that, a lot of people my age and a lot of first-time voters are going to be scared. And I'm concerned they're not going to show up to the polls and exercise their right. That's all I have. I don't want to take away from some of the other people who are testifying. So thank you.
Thank you for your input, and thank you for encouraging young people to engage in the voting process. That concludes the Zoom input testimony. We'll go back to just in-person testimony. Jordan Madden, followed by Kevin Huachin. If you would, please, it's okay not to use 3 minutes, okay? You don't have to, because the chair acknowledges that it's 5:30, 5:40 or so, and we have about 30 more people. So please, Mr. Madden.
Yes, sir. All right. Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, committee. I'm Jordan Madden, freshman student at Georgia State, and I will be giving a testimony on behalf of the Campaign Legal Center and Caleb Jackson. Campaign Legal Center writes to express our strong opposition to H. Bill 1464. The nearly 40-page omnibus bill would make it harder for nonprofit organizations and well-meaning volunteers to donate food and water to voters waiting in long lines at the poll, give the Georgia Bureau of Investigation unprecedented and unnecessary power over Georgia elections, and decrease the number of voting machines available at each precinct. H. Bill 1464 also includes provisions that will make it easier for partisan bad actors to engage in third-party election audits, which could delay the finalization of election results and undermine voter confidence and trust in the accuracy of Georgia elections. The bill invites partisan poll watchers into the absentee ballot tabulation process, which will slow down the counting of absentee ballots and put unwarranted pressure on election volunteers who face more threats and intimidation than ever before during the 2020 and 2021 election cycle. While H. Bill 1464 does not include a couple of positive changes, when it does include a couple of positive changes, including a provision that will revise the misleading disclaimer that non-governmental organizations are required to include on each absentee ballot application they send out, those few improvements do not outweigh the harm that will be caused by the bill's other provisions. Less than 2 months ago, Governor Brian Kemp promised that the state would not be passing any more election laws changes this year. If this committee passes and Governor Kemp signs H. Bill 1464 into law, you will all be taking a step to make voter in Georgia harder for the second year in a row and deteriorating Georgia voter confidence in the state election. You will also be breaking the promise that Governor Kemp made to the Peach State voters in January. For this reason, we strongly ask all members of the Senate Committee on Ethics to vote against H. Bill 1464. Thank you.
Thank you for your input, Mr. Madden. If I understand the governor's comments correctly, and be careful how I don't speak for the governor. I believe he said he would entertain no overhaul of the SB 202, and that's not the intent of this legislation. We now hear from Kevin Huachin. Thank you. Good to see you again.
Thank you for
having me here. My name is Kevin Huachin. I'm a community organizer from the Georgia Latino Alliance for Human Rights, and I also grew up in Tifton, Georgia. The Georgia Latino Alliance for Human Rights, it reaches out to voters in all counties in the state of Georgia and empowers them to exercise their right to vote. I'm here to ask you to vote against HB 1464. In Section 4 of this bill, the amount of voting booths that have to be provided could change from 1 booth for every 250 electors to 1 for every 250 electors who have not voted yet. In Gwinnett County, in cities like Lawrenceville, Lilburn, and Norcross, where communities of color have increased exponentially, this would specifically target voters of color. In the broad majority of precincts in Gwinnett County, the amount of voters outnumber registered electors who did not vote. And in the entire county, the amount of voters outnumber registered voters who did not vote. According to the Secretary of State, from the 622,000 registered voters, over 400,000 people voted in the 2020 general elections. That is 67% of the registered voters in the county. At the same time, this change is happening while the proportion and amount of voters of color in Georgia, especially those in Metro Atlanta, continue to grow. Since 2016, there have been many more Black people who have registered and voted in Gwinnett County. From 2016 to 2020, there has been a 33% increase in Black voter turnout, from 86,000 voters in 2016 to 115,000 voters in 2020. From previous years, we continue to see trends of voter growth and representation of communities of color in that increase. What HB 1464 does is to anticipate the continual growth and presence of voters of color at the booth and actually reduce voting booths available to those same voters. This could definitely cause long lines of voters who will wait on fewer voting booths. We ask that you respect Georgia voters and vote against HB 1464. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. We appreciate that. We'll move on with Mr. Madden Simha and followed by Tony Adams.
Okay. You were astonishingly close to my name.
I was probably
not
totally far off, but continue.
Good evening at this point, senators.
Yes,
My name is Mullen Simha. I'm from Advancing Justice Atlanta. We're a local community nonprofit, and I stand in opposition to House Bill 1464. As a young guy who works at a community level, folks often tell me I'm idealistic, sometimes excessively so. But it's funny because I think that's actually a great description of this bill. Because the only way this bill makes sense is if it exists in a utopia where all police officers are well-trained and pillars of our community, a utopia where cops in every community have a reputation for being protectors, not antagonists, a utopia where no cops or agents of the state are authoritarian or excessively hostile. But that's not our world. We live in a world with the Fourth and Fifth Amendments, with Miranda rights that exist explicitly to protect you from the police. That's the world the Constitution recognizes. It's the one the founding fathers recognized, but it's not the one this bill lives in. Look, there are lots of folks like me across the state of Georgia, folks who've never committed a crime in their lives. But if a police officer came up to me and started asking me questions, I would become a nervous wreck. And if that police officer started asking me questions about my voting activities, because someone saw me delivering my family's ballots, I'd be looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life, wondering what kind of Big Brother 1984 stuff was happening here. Folks like me would think twice about voting at all. Now, I'm generously assuming that that is not your intent with this bill, but that's what it's going to do. And look, it goes without saying that we should all want more secure elections, but this bill does more suppressing than it does securing. You want to have secure elections? Fund counties, fund their election boards. Oh, they don't have the resources to deal with voting and security? Give them the resources. That is within your power. This is the job of the Secretary of State's office, not the GBI. And look, I'm not vilifying all police officers. I don't hate GBI agents. My friend's dad is one. Bad apples, I get it. I'm with you. But in the immortal words of Chris Rock, there are some professions where
philosopher.
right? There are some professions where you just can't have bad apples. If Delta Airlines was like, well, most of our pilots land their planes, we got some bad apples, you would be legislating their butt into the ground. And for good reason. But when it comes to institutions as critical to our democracy as elections and policing, you want to give bad apples more unchecked power? Focus on working with communities. Focus on healing those relationships, because that's the world we live in. A world where this bill would allow for the unchecked intimidation of half the Georgia population.
Thank you for your input.
Vote against House Bill 1464.
Thank you. Tony Adams. Mr. Adams. And then after Mr. Adams, we'll have Nathan Ork. I gotta, excuse me just a second, put my glasses on. ORCK, Nathan Ork. Ork, thank you. There, Mr. Adams.
First of all, thank you to the senators who have remained to hear. There are some positive aspects to this bill, and there are some negative aspects to this bill. The one thing I want to speak to is to clarify exactly how, under this particular rule, the 250 rule that everyone keeps referring to, this gives counties the flexibility to allocate more machines where they know they're going to have a larger turnout. I have a precinct, my largest precinct has more early voting. I have a second precinct that has a larger turnout on election day. This bill will allow me to allocate more machines to a precinct I know will have a larger turnout on election day than one that has already voted. It also allows the larger counties to, there are some large counties who don't have enough room to follow the 250 rule. Not enough electrical outlets, not enough room for the machines. So that's, I just want to clarify that rule. Going back to the blank paper issue, in large counties, when they get large shipments of paper in, they then have to unload those pallets. Under this rule, they will have to secure all of that paper into another box. They won't, you're going to have to buy hundreds of boxes to put paper in after you get them from the shipment. My county is much smaller, so I simply get a box of paper at a time. But in bigger counties, you're going to have an issue of when they come in from the warehouse with that paper, they're going to have to then put that paper in secure boxes. Also, when you're talking about counting paper, not only are you going to have to count that paper at the end of an election day, every day of early voting, you're going to have to count that paper to account for it. So you can imagine the extra amount of labor that's going to include if you have to count that blank paper every day to put it back into a secure container. That's all I had to say.
Thank you.
I'll take questions.
I appreciate any questions, Mr. Adams. He has provided input on multiple occasions on elections.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm sorry. My name is Tawny Adams. I'm from Heard County.
That's right.
Yeah, we have about 8,000 registered voters. So we're a smaller county. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, the chair will acknowledge we've now made it through 2 of 4 pages of in-person testimony. And I will be here as long as you are here. Okay, so we'll work through this and get all of your input. The chair recognizes Nathan Ork.
Hello, senators. My name is Nathan Ork. I'm an elections clerk from Athens, Clarke County. Athens, Clarke County has 78,000 active registered voters. In order, I'm going to address a question that was asked by, I believe, Senator Harrell earlier. In terms of weighing paper, it's not every ream of paper is necessarily going to weigh the same. So you can't be certain that there's that exact amount of pages when you weigh paper. Not all of House Bill 1464 is necessarily bad. There are a couple of good parts of it. One part I particularly like is section 17 on page 35, line 907, which lists a definition for the intimidation that poll workers have received in terms of being able to describe that as a felony. That's a good definition. It's good to have in there, and it protects elections officials. One place in this bill that does not have that kind of explicit definition is in section 10, specifically item D on page 27 on line 686, which is in reference to poll watchers. Some of the previous commenters have already discussed that. That section reads that certified poll watchers shall be entitled to meaningful access to polling places, tabulation centers, etc. But there is not an explicit definition for what that means. And it was determined by this committee last Wednesday when it was discussed that that definition would need to be made by the courts. However, the elections process would be better served by having a definition listed ahead of time before that would be implemented. If this bill should pass, whether that is listed in this bill or whether the state election board determines that definition. And that definition should begin with the minimum level of access that would like to be achieved for poll watchers so that that can then be expanded upon from county to county, depending on what their ability to receive those poll watchers is. The section does state that poll watchers can't overcrowd or interfere with the conduct of an election, which is the goal. But as we saw in 2020, ambiguity in where the line of interference is can create a lot of tension between poll watchers and polling officials and can create a lot of distrust in the elections process. If meaningful access is left undefined, it's likely to create even more tension, and we don't need any more tension this year than we saw in 2020. And it's likely that poll watchers will sue. A lot of the intent that I get from this bill is to increase security of elections and is to increase voter confidence in those elections. But if voters see headlines like poll watcher sues elections office for lack of access, it's only going to diminish their confidence. But if we as election officials have a definition for meaningful access that we can give to poll watchers ahead of having them in our tabulation centers and in our offices, then we can have a better relationship with them and foster better communication and understanding, which will make our relationship with them better and our relationship with the public better.
Perfect. Thank you for your input.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Renee Russo, followed by Lipta Kuzeda. First, Ms. Russo.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Renee Russo. I am also from Athens, Clark County, where Nathan already mentioned we have 78,000 registered voters, active voters. I wanted to also follow a similar format, talk about something good about the bill, and then mention something that I am not particularly fond of. First, in section 5, lines 183 through 186 and lines 235 through 238. This is regarding the application for absentee ballots. I agree with those changes. I believe it does help. So those are the good part. The part that I'm not particularly fond of, this would be sections 1 and 3. We've heard about these earlier. In our county, we do use polling locations that are not public buildings. We are allowed to operate in those locations without fee. We would like to continue those partnerships. These partnerships have been years in the building, and we would like to be able to continue. So we would like to request that we exclude the use of polling locations from being considered something that has to go through the state elections board application and approval process. So that's what I have.
Thank you. Thank you for your input. We appreciate it. We're going to move forward. I know this, I'm doing a poor job. Lupita Casava.
Good afternoon, Chairman Burns and members of the committee. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. My name is Lupita Quesada and I work with the Latino Community Fund Georgia. We are a nonpartisan and nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting, investing, and enhancing democracy and opportunities for Latinos, immigrants, and the larger community in Georgia. Our organization also hosts the Latino for Democracy Coalition, where a total of 11 organizations provide civic education, voter registration, and lead Get Out the Vote campaigns.
Part of the educational work we do is to help citizens navigate the election process so they feel comfortable exercising their right to vote and adhering to voter laws. Today, I am here to share serious concerns with the language of the bill. Specifically, and for the sake of time, we want to address two of them today. Section 4 of this bill reduces the number of voting machines allowed at the polls, so that in some counties, it may limit officials to just a couple of voting machines. Georgia is already infamous for having long voting lines, and this is going to make it worse. Please have in mind that hardworking families that have voted every single one of you into office may not be able to exercise their vote simply because of the lack of time and limitation of voting machines. Long lines and wait times hinder voting participation. Secondly, instead of clarifying our laws, HB 1464 creates more confusion. LCF Georgia, alongside 11 members of the Latinos for Democracy table, all nonpartisan community organizations, invest time, personnel, and money to educate Georgia citizens about the changes brought by the Election Integrity Act of 2021 across the state. If HB 1464 becomes law, we may have other new and additional procedures and processes which add additional complexities to the process and will certainly affect the ability of some within our community to have their voices heard via the election process. It will also incur in tremendous extra work and unplanned expenses from our organization, considering new materials, videos will need to be developed, new organizers we will need to train, additional updates made to our website, because we do all of this in 3 languages. The translation cost of it all, no doubt, we are adding a burden on American citizens wanting to cast their ballot and use their right at the polls. My hope is instead of adding complexities and limiting the ability of citizens to vote, or even learn what they need to know to vote by changing the law every year, we focus on ensuring that all of those who want to vote participate in the democratic process of our beautiful, diverse state. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your input. Chair recognizes Hannah Gorbelesi. Hannah, I must have mispronounced that last name terribly. Gebrelesi. All right, then we'll move forward and we'll circle back. Ann Gray. And then followed by Aglima Kandokar. Alika Kondoker. Thank you, Ms. Gray.
Hi there, my name is Ann Gray Herring, and I'm the Policy Analyst of Common Cause Georgia. Just thank you to everyone that's still here at this late hour. And I realize at this point, you've heard from a lot of people, so I don't have a lot of things to raise that you haven't already heard, but there are a few things I just want to highlight. There are some provisions in the current draft of the bill that we do support, like extending time off for employees to include early voting, changing the third party ballot application disclaimer to make it less confusing, and easing some of the reporting burden on overworked election officials on election night. But the bill as it stands will have a net negative effect on Georgians' freedom to vote. And, just a couple of the specific things we would point to, as others mentioned, the language in section 16 and the removal of the under seal provisions is just really ambiguous as it's currently written. In this committee's hearing last week, there seemed to be some definite confusion over that. And, with the state of elections as they are, any ambiguity should be really addressed on this end of the process rather than lawyers interpreting in different ways later on. So we would suggest just adding language to clear that up and making more definite time parameters of when public inspection happens, and clarifying that this will not interfere with the certification process, and that our election officials aren't going to be managing public inspections at the same time they're trying to perform the essential functions of their job. And many have also mentioned the reduction in the number of voting machines, and I understand that this bill would give some discretion to officials, but just making it as easy as possible for people to vote is always a good thing. The more machines you have, the easier it is. And we just want to briefly flag out what we see as sort of a missed opportunity in this bill is written. Right now, polling places are only required to keep 10% of the full number of registered voters emergency ballots. And with everything else that's in this bill, if it's salvageable, we would encourage in addition to the bill to add a higher number of emergency ballots at each polling location. So if you do run into issues with the election machines or long lines, that provision is in place.
Thank you for your input. Alima? Hello, help me, conductor. Thank you. And then after that, Elizabeth Delmas.
So before I begin, I did want to pose a preliminary question. When will there be a vote on this bill? And could there be a chance that there could be a vote as early as tomorrow?
There will be an announcement at the end of the meeting.
Okay, so at the edge of my seat for that.
I suspect you may be. Probably be totally underwhelmed, but go ahead.
Well, my name is Aklima Kondoker, and I am the Chief Legal Officer of the New Georgia Project Action Fund. We are a nonpartisan organization dedicated to increasing civic participation across the great state of Georgia. And I testify in front of you today to oppose 1464 because of the inherent harms that it poses against not only our county, but our state agencies who are charged with administering and overseeing our elections. The issues that come from clarifying felonies in such a way that could lead to disenfranchisement of voters, the funding requirements that make it more difficult for our counties to get necessary funding for our elections and the like. So I do want to thank our election workers who came up to testify against this bill, because it's very clear, I think, to everybody who's been here to listen, that there are some concerns and issues that will make it more difficult for elections administration here in Georgia to be carried out smoothly. So in calling on you to oppose this bill, this is because it unduly burdens county election administration, which in turn makes it easier to disenfranchise voters, whether intentionally or unintentionally. One of the major factors here is including the GBI, a body that's already invested in investigating criminal matters more than any other matters. We have a Secretary of State's office that's charged with administering our elections, overseeing our elections, a state election board that's also charged with investigating election-related issues. We do not need to enter in this external body that does not have integral knowledge about our elections to make determinations about how they ought to be investigated, about subpoena powers, original jurisdiction, and other things that criminalize voters for simple things like just showing up to vote. People should not be scrutinized in that way. People should not be afraid to exercise their right to vote because there are more criminal powers watching over them in the activity of attempting to vote. So firstly, let's talk about why the GBI is even here. Why was that even a thought? Firstly, there's no reason for this bill to exist, and its passage will fuel false conspiracy claims. Over 2020, after several audits and fraud investigations, Georgia's various election fraud claims have all been unfounded and dismissed. Our top elections officials publicly attested that our elections are secure, and there continues to be no evidence of widespread fraud or any need to usurp power from state and county election officials. There is no cause for HB 1464, and it will overburden our counties and our administrative agencies if it is passed, as we have heard overwhelmingly this evening. To that point, secondly, this bill adds new administrative hurdles for our counties to get election support. SB 202 banned private funding without conducting any analysis or providing a fiscal note. HB 1464 follows the same path, appearing to lift the funding ban, but with no guidance on how this will be done. Once again, there is no analysis or fiscal note. I bring this up because the Elections Division of the Secretary of State's office has a fiscal year 2022 budget that makes up only 0.25% of the overall state budget. I understand my time is up.
Thank you for your input. We
Certainly.
appreciate it, and you're welcome to add additional testimony in written form.
I am happy to do so, but also want to pause should somebody want clarification or questions from me.
Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you.
Seeing none, thank you. Elizabeth Delmas, followed by Salik Sahani.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Elizabeth Ann Delmas. I'm a registered Fulton County voter. I'm retired federal and state sworn fraud investigator too. So I did about 40 years as a federal law enforcement and state. I worked early voting, election day, and so I did it last year. So I'm familiar with all your changes. I just wanted to tell everybody here, SB 202, thank you for all of you and your efforts on it. I know you get beat up all the time. You did a lot of good, so thank you. I'm here to ask you to amend Chapter 2 of Title 21. It pertains to individuals that are challenging voters, and it gives some protection to them.
What specific section and line does it relate to in this bill?
I think it's going to be Chapter 2, Title 2.
This is Chapter 2, Title, yeah.
Code Section 21-2-230.
I need a page number, reference number, a line number of the bill.
Well, I can read it.
It's not in the bill.
No, my understanding is that, Chairman, is that Mr. Carver may have given you information. He is with the
Yeah, I know Mr. Carver.
State Election
but
Conference Task Board, and it was in HB 1401. So it was in House Bill 1401.
This is 1464.
Right.
This is 1464.
But my understanding is we could have this added to this bill to amend Chapter 2 of Title 2 of the.
Again, this is testimony on 1464.
So
you're recommending an amendment to 1464.
Exactly.
If you would submit that in written form.
Yes. And I think maybe it's already been submitted to you.
Be
I'll be
happy to
glad to
receive it
submit it
more than
again.
once.
I'll be glad to submit it again.
Okay.
Can I read it to you?
You can briefly summarize it.
Okay. It's basically, we would like neither an elector filing a challenge pursuant to subsection A of this code section, nor his or her attorneys or expert witnesses assisting with such challenge shall be liable at law or equity for filing such challenge excerpt in the event of gross negligence, willful or wanton misconduct or malfeasance. Is to protect voters that are challenging the voters
Right.
from.
I
SB 202.
understand the intent and I am familiar with the request. Mercifully, I'm not an attorney, so I can't directly speak to the recommendation, but I appreciate your input. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Salik Sahani versus followed by Mr. Garland Favorito. Mr. Sahani. Mr. Sahani?
I'm right here.
Oh, there you are. I'm sorry. Had to wake up. Thank you. Please.
Good evening, Chairman Burns, members of this committee, my fellow Georgians. My name is Salik Sohani. I'm a senior community organizer with Georgia Muslim Voter Project. And for sake of time, I won't once again go through our mission as my colleague Asim already did that.
Thank you.
But I'd like to begin by expressing Georgia Muslim Voter Project's opposition to this bill, HB 1464. This omnibus bill adds and reinforces the restrictions to our critical voting process that was already hampered by the passage of SB 202. HB 1464 also adds tremendous burdens on our selfless election administration officials and poll workers. Sections 1 and 3, which make it more difficult for state election boards to receive grants and funding from non-governmental organizations, would drastically reduce the abilities of election administration officials to obtain the resources and staffing necessary to mitigate long lines and ensure that voting in person is smooth and easy for all Georgians. And whereas all 159 counties here in Georgia received approximately $43 million in funding in 2020, these limitations would result in a projected 95% decrease in funding, down to approximately $270,000 for all 159 counties. And I'll let that sink in for a moment. And although we recognize that the security and integrity of our elections is absolutely essential, the additional sealing and custody requirements within sections 11 and 12 add strenuous burdens on our already strapped election administration officials. And a few election officials have already uplifted these burdens within the Special Committee on Election Integrity's meeting and noted that these requirements would further stagnate their ability to count ballots in an efficient manner. And they've also noted these concerns today as well.
Therefore, we encourage this committee to add amendments that slightly loosen these requirements, and additionally to provide provisions that support our election administration officials and poll workers. At the end of the day, we really believe that our hardworking election administration officials deserve the resources necessary to administer seamless and secure elections. I urge you all to vote no to this bill for these reasons, and also to ensure every Georgia voter has confidence within the integrity and efficiency of our crucial election process, and that each Georgia voter has equal access to the ballot box, regardless of their situation. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all today. I'm happy to yield for any questions.
Questions? Thank you for your input.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Garland Favorito, I would like to acknowledge the fact that I have some strong colleagues up here with me, and I'm grateful for Senator Harrell, Senator Jones, Senator Tarte, and the Dean of the Senate, Senator Harbison. Mr. Favorito.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's great to be in the Senate where you follow the rules of a hearing. So I want to thank Chairman Blackman over in the House for Section 16 of this bill. It makes ballots public record so that the public can verify election results and detect suspect counterfeit ballots. The ballot images, we were grateful that you passed ballot image public records in Senate Bill 202, but we found that they are not enough because, as you know, we have provided every member in the Georgia General Assembly the evidence of massive tampering of the original ballot images in the 2020 election in Fulton County and in other counties, and we're happy to that's up on Voter GA for the world to see. And Senator Harrell, I'm glad to address your questions. You have some really good questions about the paper, and I'm glad to address those, but I need to move to the key issue. The issue I want to address is Section 42. I'm sorry, Section 1, Section 3, lines 42 and 94 of the bill in regarding to the lifting the ban of private money and putting it into the partisan state election board to distribute. In Wisconsin, the Gableman report from the Office of Special Counsel found that Mark Zuckerberg and his wife, Priscilla Chan, spent $330 million to establish the Center for Technology and Civic Life. And their policy director there was David Plouffe. He had authored the book, A Citizen's Guide to Beating Donald Trump. Much of that money was used in that regard. The counties were required to have nonpartisan get out the vote efforts, as well as a Dropbox scheme that was implemented here in Georgia. We have the videos of the ballot harvesters that many of you have already seen. In Georgia, the Secretary of State allowed $45 million to be distributed disproportionately in violation of the equal protection clauses of the Georgia and United States constitutions for virtually every member here, who's here today and who's testified. After the 2020 election, the legislature again passed Senate Bill 202. We were grateful for that. They banned the private money, but they did not ban two things that are very important. One is receiving indirect money, and one is the complementary technical resources which were controlling the elections in Fulton County and in other counties. This is possibly may be connected to why the ballot images have so much tampering. The counties also receive a lot of money indirectly into the counties under the guise of something like diversity, and then they route that to the elections division for partisan uses. So the bottom line is that we need to improve Section 42 and Section 1, line 42, and Section 3, line 94 to make sure that those no longer basically allow for indirect money and so on. We'd also like to strike those paragraphs to the state election board. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Tamara Seymour, followed by Sousa.
Yes, thank you. I'm Tamara Seymour from Noonan in Coweta County. I'm a member of Voter GA. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to this bill, and thank you for sticking around here. I do support the bill because I believe it contains some important provisions, such as making ballots public record. However, I do believe there are some improvements, and I want to speak to one today. This would be an amendment to add a provision to the bill that requires our voter registration data to reside on a secure in-house system as it currently does. And here's the background. Our Secretary of State has entered into a $3.5 million contract with Salesforce and MTX Consulting to move our voter registration data from a secure in-house system to the cloud where it's exposed to security risk. This was a no-bid contract, even though it exceeded $100,000. Our voter registration data can be compromised. For instance, our driver's license numbers and our birth dates are going to be sitting in the cloud where they can be hacked more easily. The current in-house fixed future costs are potentially replaced with uncontrollable subscription pricing. And the state's going to relinquish control of the system to vendors that impose a multi-customer environment where they can make software changes that are undetected and they're not approved. Third-party vendor employees are not sworn to uphold the Georgia election law. Salesforce stated publicly last year that it opposes Georgia's election law, so why execute a contract with them to manage our voter registration? And finally, it's already incurred a major security breach for another customer, and that class action suit is still pending. So once again, I ask for a provision to be added that requires our voter registration data to remain on our in-house security system.
Thank you for your input. And if you would submit your suggestions in writing, we'll be happy to give them consideration.
Thank you, sir.
Sousa, and I can't read the last name, P-A-F-F-E-R, Paffin?
Susan Daffer?
It's D. Daffer?
Yes.
Thank you, please, Sousa.
Hi, I'm Susan Daffer and I live in Brookhaven, born and bred here in Georgia. And I'm here to talk about paper. I know that's. I wanted to, it really concerns me that we had 6 sworn affidavits and including 4 senior poll managers in 2020 that testified under penalty of perjury stating the counterfeit ballots.
I would point out, this is not an investigative body. This is not the state election board. We're focused on House Bill 1464.
Right. And I want to add something to it, and
Okay.
I'll be more clear about it. But so these people actually saw ballots that had paper that was different. So
I understand that's the allegation. That's not the issue associated with this bill.
Okay. Well, I would like to suggest that we use the absentee ballots and use this new paper that would not prevent ballot counterfeiting. It would be a new paper. There's a lot of new ones out there now that have all kinds of printings, halogons, all that. And if we did that, we wouldn't have the problems that we had with the drop boxes and the problems that we had with all of that.
There's no secure paper provision in this ballot, in this legislation.
Right. This is
However, I
something I
would
would like to
suggest to you that the state election board is responsible for that decision.
Okay.
Okay. And we have certainly had discussions with the state election board about that.
Okay. Well, I would just like to see that this gets added as a little something extra.
All right. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you for your input. Just administration. We're looking at about 22 or 3 more opportunities to provide input. That's about another hour to an hour or more, but we welcome your input. Miranda, is that right? Labi, L-A-B-I, help me, forgive me. Got to swing back, pick up a couple. That's about right. No. I'm wrong. My mistake. Not nearly that many. About 15 more, but if you would. Well, yeah, they say about 13 plus 2 circle backs, about 15 more. Melinda Hodge is up after Miss Labby. Okay.
Good afternoon, Chair Burns and members of the committee. My name is Hamida Labi. I'm a Georgia native. I'm also policy counsel at the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund. Since its founding more than 80 years ago by Thurgood Marshall, LDF has worked to secure and protect Black Americans' right to vote, which the Supreme Court has called preservative of all rights. We urge this committee to vote down House Bill 1464 and to craft legislation that builds upon the strong turnout of voters of color in recent elections and tears down remaining barriers to the ballot rather than complicating the electoral process for voters and administrators alike. I'll highlight 3 of our specific concerns quickly. First, this bill's expansion of the GBI's mandate to investigate election crimes without a referral is not necessary and sends the wrong message to voters. Georgia's elections have been put under a microscope, and the myth of significant election crimes or voter fraud has been shattered. We know that excessive law enforcement presence at the polls or involvement in elections generally can be intimidating to voters. And this is especially true in Black communities that have felt the brunt of well-documented abuses. We should be celebrating recent robust turnout by voters of color, not threatening these gains with legislation like House Bill 1464. Second, this bill's reduction of the number of voting machines required on election day could lead to longer lines, which is already a tremendous problem here in Georgia. Georgia's made national headlines for long voting lines in 2020, both on primary election day and during early voting in the general election. State lawmakers should be working to address this problem directly, not exacerbate it. Election rules have changed substantially since the record 2020 early vote turnout, and we know that Black voters on average wait longer than other voters. The state should not lower this basic standard for voter access unless and until it becomes clear over several election cycles that one machine per 250 voters is not needed. Third, several of this bill's provisions put more burdens on county officials without resources to support these requirements. Much of you've heard today from many of the folks who have testified, including the chain of custody rules and the ballot inspection access. We encourage you to solicit and listen to feedback on these items from election officials in counties, especially with large Black populations, because we know that they are consistently asked to do the most with the fewest resources. There's a common theme here. People of color participated in the political process in record numbers during the 2020 election, and nowhere was that more consequential than here in our state. Some people do not like that this nation and Georgia are moving forward and inching closer to the one person, one vote ideals. People who are afraid of a robust, inclusive, multiracial democracy are pushing you to enact false solutions in search of made-up problems. Thank you for taking our testimony. We'll submit additional written comments.
Happy to
Thank
receive
you.
it. Thank you. Melinda Hodge, and then followed by Julie Adams. Melinda Hodge, Chatham County.
Yes.
Welcome from Savannah.
That's right.
Thank you for coming up.
Thank you for having us. I appreciate this forum. I appreciate the opportunity to address you all. I came over 250 miles.
Absolutely.
To share with you.
You may get the award for the farthest
it,
commuting participant. I'm not sure.
It's that big a deal.
Heard County is not that far, and I think some of the please go ahead.
Yes, sir.
My apologies.
No.
We'll restart that clock.
No,
My
you're
apologies.
fine. Thank you. It's that big a deal. Our county is a very large county. It doesn't feel very large. Sometimes our citizens don't realize how large it is. It's nearly 300,000 people. And out of those 300,000, I believe we have 240,000 registered voters. So people in Chatham County want to voice their vote. It's very important to us. Some of the items within this bill impacts us tremendously as far as funding. We're already underfunded. We're already understaffed. We're already having difficulty finding people to work there in the polls. And so this will be crippling to us. COVID has impacted operations, the nature of elections, if you know anything about it, it's ever changing, ever evolving, and we comply. That's what we're here to do. I mean, that's what we want to do. Whenever we receive a new machine, we will implement the changes, we will do the training, we will find the funds to staff the changes. But this just feels like undue stress and chaos for us right now because we're adjusting to the times, we're adjusting to things that are beyond our control. And so those things that are within our control, those things where we can offer some in-depth knowledge of what elections entail, how this legislation impacts us, we're here for it. As you can see, we've come out in numbers. I've come all the way, we're joking about it, but it's that important to give to share with you our expertise and how it impacts. And what we're sharing here today doesn't even demonstrate the depth of it, because we're going to find out it's impactful in a way that we did not anticipate. Some of the specific things that I do want to address, I don't want to regurgitate what's already been said, but I do want to talk about the fact that the making the images available, they're already available for citizens to view publicly. If in fact that does go through with this legislation, it definitely needs to be something that takes place after the certification. Some of the other parts, section 10, section 12, section 14, 15, and 16, section 18, these all negatively impact my county. I am an elected official. And so this process directly impacts me and the seat that I hold. And so I can't allow this process to fail me. So I want it to work. I want our processes to be transparent, fair. I want the public to have access. I don't care who you vote for. I want you to vote. And I want it to be an easy, accessible process for any and all of our voters. I do want to commend you for section 17, where it addresses intimidation and violence against our poll workers. We've experienced that. I mean, Georgia was under a national scope scrutiny.
Thank you. Thank you for your input. Thank you for traveling up. And if you'd like to add additional input, we'd be happy to accept it in writing.
Okay. No questions. Thank you.
Next is Miss Julie Adams, followed by Stephen McReynolds, excuse me. But Julie Adams, Miss Adams.
I'm right here.
Right here. There you are. All I have to do is look up. Thank you.
Chairman Burns and everyone else that stayed this late, I really do appreciate that you've stayed this late. I don't know about you guys, but I'm tired, so I'm going to try to make my comments quick. First of all, I want to tell you all that SB 202, we really appreciate all the efforts, and there were some very good things in that bill, just like there is in this one. And you all should be commended for your dedication to transparent and free and fair elections. There are a couple of comments. Quite honestly, I've changed about 5 times today what I'm going to say while I've been sitting here. I have no notes in front of me. I want to say a couple of things. I really appreciate all the poll workers, officials, managers that have come in. But I think it's a little ridiculous that they can't count the paper every day to make sure we have the amount of pieces of paper we're supposed to have, not more, not less. And, it seems like there could be an easy adjustment. I have poll watched many, many days. I've never seen a day in early voting that there wasn't plenty of time to count. It moves very slowly. On election day, it's typically, it's not that busy during the day. It just has spikes and it has down times. And of course, once the polls close, counting the paper would be easy. The other thing I want to say is about poll watchers. In section 10, I came before you a couple of weeks ago. I think it's discriminating against a lot of poll watchers to only have people with political parties with a named party on the ballot. The other thing I want to say about poll watchers, I've heard a lot of poll workers say today that they're great on the new things in this bill. The one thing that upset me, quite honestly, the most is that it is to emotionally disturb a poll worker is, I believe, a felony. I can tell you with poll watching, there have been a couple of times that I've walked into a poll with my badge on, with a smile on my face, and with my letter from my elections department, walked up to a poll manager and said, "Hi, my name is Julie Adams, and this seems to be distressful to them." There are poll managers out there that do not like poll watchers, and I have no idea why. But you know, I mean, that's intimidating to some poll managers. Not all of them. Most of them are very nice and do a good job.
Thanks, guys. Thank you for your input. Stephen McReynolds, followed by Bentley Hudgens. Mr. McReynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Stephen W. McReynolds. I'm from Commerce. I speak in opposition to a certain part of this bill, Section 13, line 775, line 776. Currently, our election law requires that superintendents report to the Secretary of the State the number of ballots by 10 p.m. of the election day. This bill will take away that requirement. I oppose that. I do not think that is wise to remove the requirement to report the number of ballots that were cast on the day of election at 10 o'clock. If anything, you might modify the time to like 11 p.m. or midnight, but please don't remove this requirement. Let us know how many ballots were cast on election day, the day of election day. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your input. We appreciate that. Mr. Hudgens, Bentley Hudgens, followed by Janelle Bedfelter.
Hello, everybody. My name is Bentley. Thank you all for the folks who are still here, who are interested in hearing from the public. Thank you for holding on. I have a few things I just wanted to point out. As some of my colleagues said earlier, in line 682 and 687, there isn't enough explanation for meaningfully to be ironically meaningful in this particular section of code. So fairly to meaningfully is not a good change, and there's not enough explanation for it to have clear definitions, and it's going to cause more confusion on the day of the vote. The other thing that I wanted to point out is on section 4. So it's lines 110 to 117. When we are, sorry, wrong one. I apologize. Lines 42 and 83, sections 1 and 2. And this is talking about the funds. I just wanted to point out some numbers, and this is from the last couple of budgets. In 2020, the expenditure report for elections was $21,968,000 or $968,800. In 2021, it was $44,881,741. In fiscal year 2022, the amount budgeted for elections was $7,649,332. And this year's budget for fiscal year 2023, the amount allocated is $7,816,652. So I don't know about y'all, but $44.9 million approximately versus $7.8 million approximate is a big difference. And so by the budget's own admission, we are spending more money than we are allocating for elections. And so making the process for county election boards to receive support from the community, making that process harder is not serving our elections infrastructure. I also just wanted to note that in fiscal year 2023, in the amended budget, there was an additive $288,491 for elections administration, but for investigations under the Secretary of State's office, there was an increase of $365,925. So I just wanted to point out that the numbers aren't adding up. Instead of making it harder for our elections, those who are charged with administering our elections like they did today, we should be further resourcing them. And then the last point that I wanted to make, I don't have the bill language in front of me, but making it a felony to intimidate poll workers. While I appreciate that we are acknowledging that poll workers are under, okay, thank you.
Thank you for your input. Again, we're happy to accept additional written
Will do.
testimony. Janelle Kledfelter, followed by Laura Petcu. Laura. Ms. Kledfelter.
Clodfelter.
Kledfelter, thank you.
Yes. My name is Janelle Clodfelter. I live in Gwinnett County, and I'm with a group in Gwinnett County, and I follow Garland around because he knows his stuff. Good afternoon, all. I bet you're glad this session is almost over. I'll be glad as well, as long as I get these things into the bill. Okay. It's terrifying to be a Georgia resident and feel like you're up against a brick wall on issues you feel are merely logical. I love the fact that the ballots will be made public, but logically, shouldn't envelopes be made public as well? It's just a one-word addition. On the drop boxes, it is not logical to add something into law that has done nothing but cause chaos in our elections, and it adds a huge cost. Poll workers do not know how to monitor drop boxes. They are locked, but they have a big hole in them. Some have videos, some don't. Poll workers' hands are tied in proactively preventing ballot dumps. And if they do try, the wrath of the Secretary of State and the media will come down. And logically, why are they needed? You're standing in a voting location. I'm looking for logic here. And on the private money issue on section 1 and 3, just the thought of a few people paying for our elections throws us directly into third world mode. And for what? Gwinnett County, did they really need to spend $2,500 on magnifying sheets? Did they really need to spend $25,000 on multi-language signs? I happen to live in a very diverse neighborhood, and I know for a fact that they can all read English if they are a voting citizen. And this is coming directly from. I will be glad to pay 25 cents to vote on a beautiful hologram security paper. If you guys could pull in SB 538, like you pulled in a lot of other bills, they may not have to count that paperwork because it will actually have a serial number on it. If it's 25 cents for peace of mind in my vote, 25 cents to return to a first world country, 25 cents to return to logic, I am so hoping logic will save this state and legislators are actually listening to my plea.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Laura Petcu, followed by Carmen Tripp. How bad did I do, Miss Petcu?
You did great.
I did okay. Okay. That makes me feel better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Laura Petco. I live in Winder, Georgia. As you can tell, I'm not a Georgia native. I've been here over 32 years. And to be honest with you, I'd never done this before, but since the 2020 election, I've done quite a few things as first. Somebody earlier said that there's fear in the immigrant community. As you can tell by my accent, I am an immigrant. And the man that mentioned that, he's absolutely correct. My fear is that my vote didn't count, that my family's vote didn't count. And I tell you why. I don't represent the firm. I represent me. I sometimes volunteer with Voter GA, but I'm gonna tell you how I seen certain things. I've requested over 25 open record requests. I studied chain of custody forms. I watched videos of drop boxes.
I need you to address the bill.
I will.
Please address the bill.
I'm gonna wrap it nice and beautiful. So I've seen what happened with the drop boxes, and I love the fact that you guys work on the 1464. Overall, I support that. I truly do. What I would like to see is going back to the election prior to 2020. We didn't have so many issues about people like me with an accent not being capable to understand the ballot. So if we could strike out the drop boxes from the bill, it will make it for a safer election. My opinion on it.
You want to give me the line number?
Yes, let me get my glasses. Okay, is section 21-2-3.
Section 21 is not a part of this, is it? Give me the line number, the section number in
What do-
HB 14.
Do you have the line number?
21-2-3-82.
Yes.
It's the code section.
That's not,
The
that's the
code
code
section.
section. I need
The
the
code
reference on
section.
this bill.
I
don't believe the elimination of drop boxes in this bill or the justification. It does require that it be
Section
secure.
7.
Section 7, give me the line
thank
number,
you,
please.
Garland.
Line number.
Everything's in 21-2-3-82.
But I'll be happy to send you the details
Provide
on
that.
that.
That'd be helpful. Thank you.
And like I said, I'm not a community organizer. Maybe I should be, but I appreciate your time and listening to me.
Well, I appreciate your input.
And I will send you the details on the code.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Carmen Tripp, followed by Victor Tripp. Ms. Tripp.
Hello, yes, I am Carmen Tripp, and I appreciate very much the opportunity to speak. By the way, I'm from Cuba originally, and that I'm not going to elaborate on that, except that I'm familiar with what can happen when an election system is not ethical. So appreciate very much all the work you're doing. First of all, I would say that without elaborating, because some of these have been mentioned, I do very much urge you to prohibit the indirect private funding and complementary resources from interfering with our elections. So also, I would like to point out the need to preserve the outer envelopes with the ballots. They need to become public record. This was already mentioned just recently, and I agree completely on that. Very important. I believe that it refers to 21-5, not 500, 16, yeah, well, section 16, yeah. All right. And then I'm not going to elaborate on this because I know my husband will. It's on banning the drop boxes because, as it's been pointed out, there's a lot of things that have been done very illegitimately with those boxes.
That's an allegation, and there's nothing in the bill that addresses banning drop boxes.
Okay, I won't elaborate. All right. One of the things that I'm concerned about also, but you say that it does not pertain to this bill, is the security paper. Because I think in terms of how the comparison between dollars being counterfeit and ballots being counterfeit. And frankly, I see ballots being counterfeit being a lot worse situation than dollars being counterfeit, because that's a financial problem. It can be very terrible, but this one affects our entire lives because it's our entire government that will be go one direction or another, and it will include things like finances. So, so yes, I am also for including the special paper, so security paper. But one thing that I'm
Security
concerned
paper
about
is
is,
not addressed in the bill, is it?
well, what I understand is that.
I hear, I appreciate your input, but you have to focus on the
Okay,
bill.
I'll move on. All right, so then another thing is that we have to retain the nonpartisan poll watchers. I believe that we do need to give them that opportunity, whatever party they're with, as long as they do have a qualified writing candidate. So instead of having to be on the ballot like, you know, the bigger parties, it is good to have more participation on this because it's very important. And the other thing is that we would not extend the counting beyond the day of election. And I agree, maybe changing the time.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your input. Mr. Tripp, Victor Tripp.
My name is Victor Tripp. I'm a voter from DeKalb County, and I want to address section 7 and then a general comment about unfunded liabilities. That's regarding drop boxes. Much of the 42 million that Mark Zuckerberg spent in Georgia on the November 2020 election was used to implement unsecure drop boxes in certain counties. You've probably seen videos of ballot harvesters.
If you would please address the bill, we're not dealing
Section-
with allegations. This is not an investigation.
Section
We're
7?
hearing the bill.
Yeah, section 7.
I'm in section 7 and nowhere does it mention Mr. Zuckerberg.
Oh, okay. Well, this is evidence for my proposed changes. So,
And suggest, make your recommendations on your proposed changes.
okay, well, we need to tighten up some loopholes that are in the SB 202 codification of these drop boxes. And one is that the governor can declare an emergency and reestablish outdoor drop boxes. I think that should not be in there. Poll
Give me a
workers.
line number of that, please.
I'm sorry, I don't have that.
I'm not sure it's in this bill, but I'm happy to listen. Keep going.
Poll workers are not required to challenge ballot harvesters, even though they're watching them put the multiple ballots into a drop box because they're indoors. But there's no implementation for enforcing that. And then drop box openings are large enough to put a whole handful of ballots in there. Now, True the Vote has found that 7% of ballots that came through the drop boxes and mail-in voting were, they call them trafficked, which means harvested.
I appreciate your input. That is an allegation that needs investigation. This is not an investigative committee.
Well, I'm proposing that we solve two problems at once.
Do
One
you
is
support the GBI having investigative power? That's section what, 18?
I don't have an opinion on that. But what I support is banning the drop boxes and fixing the unfunded liabilities at the same time, because they're very expensive. And that's one of, we just heard recently here how the cost has gone up radically in recent years. And we found here in Georgia that 106,000 ballots that came through the drop boxes had no valid chain of custody.
Thank you for your input. I recognize that there's a great amount of latitude in election concerns. We're trying to focus on HB 1464. That's our objective for the evening. Kevin Gridley. Sorry again, say again. Gridley, and followed by Jordan Madden. Kevin Gridley.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I did want to, I do support 1048, but I wanted to echo the concerns about putting people's voter data on the cloud that previous people have mentioned, along with getting rid of private money totally.
Again, neither of those issues are part of 1464.
Well, they could be amended. The bill could be amended to include those. And so third-party poll watchers also need to be allowed because there's no reason transparency is a bad thing. But the main things I wanted to focus on is amending the bill to include drop boxes being banned in the state. They were not in the state prior to 2020. There's no reason why they need to be here now. Most logical, rational people understand that they're not needed, and all they are is an opportunity for fraud.
I appreciate your opinion. Please address the bill.
Yeah, if the bill could be amended to include the banning of drop boxes.
There's no current amendment to that effect.
Can we, are we allowed to request amendments?
You may put a request
Okay.
in writing.
Okay,
but,
I can send, I can
we're
send. I
trying
can-
to understand this bill and with input on this bill.
Okay, well, I can send that request in. Also in the bill, I would like to have language added to include envelopes to be part of the unsealed records and not just the ballots, because we saw, and again, I'm not trying to relitigate 2020, but the Election Assistance Commission showed egregious discrepancies in the.
And I appreciate your input.
Yeah.
That's not a part of this.
No, but
discussion.
it's evidence for why it needs to be included, because we tried to get the Secretary of State to do it. They shirked their responsibility.
I appreciate your
this-
opinion.
well, I'm just,
ask that you
I'm
submit your
addressing the bill. I'm just saying why I think it needs to be
Give me
added.
the section and line number.
No, I'm just saying, I don't know what to say, but it's in there about ballots being made public record. I'm just
Oh,
asking for,
absolutely. That's in there.
I'm sorry?
That is in there as part of this
Yeah,
bill.
well, I'm asking that you just add envelopes to be added as public record, because if we can't rely on, our representatives or Secretary of State, you're relying on a Superior Court judge, one judge who's going to be intimidated by maniacal activists to unseal these ballots. And it's much easier to fix things before the fact and a lot taken care of it then versus after the fact when people are being intimidated. So to me, there's no reason not to add this one word of envelopes in there. It makes all the sense in the world. There's no reason not to.
And the line number?
I don't know the line number.
And if you would do the review and suggest the line number where it would be.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your input. Jordan Madden, followed by Mr. Ferguson, Earl Ferguson. Mr. Madden, are you here? We'll continue with Mr. Ferguson and come back if we need to. Earl Ferguson, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee and survivors in the audience.
Survivors indeed.
Thank you for
Survivors
the opportunity
indeed.
to address something here. I am a volunteer. I'm a registered voter in Fulton County, and I'm a volunteer who has been working to remove unqualified voters from the voter rolls using Section 229 in the law. And I'm here to ask you to accept and include the amendment that provides for personal liability for persons like me who have done that.
Again, you're welcome to submit that amendment. That currently is not a part of this legislation.
I understand that, but I believe it has already been submitted. It's just not
Good.
included.
Thank you.
So I'm speaking in favor of its inclusion.
Thank you.
I'm responsible for the removal of about 296 voters who have moved to outside the state of Georgia and who've registered to vote in other states. I think everybody's entitled to one vote, but I don't think they're entitled to two. That's my statement, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your input. And by the way, I agree with you. One vote is all that any of us are allocated. Mr. Todd Edwards, ACCG. Is Todd, are you here? Mr. Edwards? Mr. Edwards is also a survivor. I think I've seen him all day today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Todd Edwards with the Association of County Commissioners of Georgia. I would have been here earlier, but they got a little gambling bill also going on.
That's okay. We got you.
I think overall, the bill is well intentioned. There are indeed many good provisions in it, but several of them are great concerns to our county election officials. I'm going to take that time out briefly to thank all of them for coming up today, and thank you all for staying so late. The ink it's still drying on Senate Bill 202. There was extensive training required going on currently, lots of new responsibilities, including redistricting. And I would caution against any additional requirements, of several of them found in this bill, on our poll workers, on our election officials at this time. This will impact counties. It will impact elections and county administration. And I would urge your consideration and focusing on still implementing, getting 202 right before we go further down the road of adding responsibilities. Now, specifically, Mr. Chairman, I know you like specifics, and I'll do a lightning round on this.
All right, lightning round.
Several good provisions. Section 4 on the 1/250 ratio. That's great. Section 5, good. Section 6, good. We get into Section 8, and it has challenges of the chain of custody that many of the election officials have already addressed, particularly in subsection B of there. Going all the way through. H is rather burdensome, and I could go into more detail. I won't. You've heard them all today. 9, 10, okay, but we get back into, starting on B in section 10, and this defines meaningful in terms of access to poll watchers. Without defining that specifically, you're going to have different interpretations of what is meaningful, and as you know, they become quite litigious in the election world. Also, section 12, this is the chain of custody you've heard much about. I would respect y'all's consideration in removing those provisions from the bill. I won't go into any other details other than saying that section 13, good. Section 17, I think is great. And with that, again, you know, we represent 159 counties. They represent both parties, all areas of the state. So you can imagine our members are split. We choose very carefully whether or not we at ACCG become involved in election bills, understanding all of that. It's sometimes you can't please either of the extremes, and when you speak in the middle, neither one are happy. That's probably going to be the case here, but we respectfully submit to you that now is not the time to add these additional responsibilities. But I think the security chain of custody is already covered in law, and would submit that to allow our election officials to do their jobs, carry out Senate Bill 202, and give them a break from some of the provisions I've mentioned or specifically in this legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I hope I met my allotted time. So
You're fine. Thank you. Appreciate your input. We're going to backtrack and pick up a couple of folks. Any questions? We're going to backtrack and pick up a couple of folks that were not available earlier on. Kathy Woolard, Fulton County Board of Elections. Ms. Woolard. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for staying late.
Thanks for the opportunity. I apologize that I wasn't here on time, but we were in the process of naming our new director of elections in Fulton County and having a special called meeting for that. So I got here as quickly as I could get.
Very good.
I want to echo what Mr. Edwards said, because one of the things in my 5 months now as being chair of the Fulton County Board of Registration and Elections is that we are still kind of going through the what's the word I want to say, the process of training people, the expenses of all the additional requirements for Senate Bill 202. I want to just tell you this. My dad was born in Worth County, and when Worth County gets a cold in elections, Fulton County Board of Registration and Elections gets pneumonia and comes close to dying as a result of it. We have had a budget increase from about 37 million recently until this year, probably close to 53 million, perhaps even more if you enact some of the provisions of this law. And that's for lawsuits, multiple lawsuits, open records requests, additional equipment, power and internet for some of the requirements that we have. We have to change polling places because some of our equipment now has new requirements. Everything we do is kind of in process of changing, and we are trying to bring a lot of really good changes. We're trying to listen to people about the things they want to see. But just to give you some example on this chain of custody issue, we have 250 precincts. We have more voters than 6 states in this country. We are about 70 miles from North Fulton to South Fulton, and trying to move equipment through rush hour to get back in time to report out results at 10 o'clock. If I gave each of you this much paper to count and told you that I needed it every single time you touched it, and you needed to get the number right, and you needed to sign for it, and you needed to assure that the box was secure on blank paper, we would have people not want to do elections with us anymore. We would have delays in getting back to the office to count votes, which is the most important thing we do. Counting blank paper is not the most important thing we do. We have to find secure boxes. And you tell me what a secure box is for 250 precincts of blank paper, and store it and count it and write our names on it every time somebody moves it. You are indeed causing additional costs for us. It could be a $10 box that you think is secure, that somebody thinks is secure. It may be one that is metal and fireproof and has all kinds of, 2-person validation on it, which could cost us $100, right? So these are things that, that drive up the cost of elections, and people come down and say, why is the cost of election this? Well, I can give you some real serious responses to that. What I would hope that you would do is hear what Mr. Edwards said, have a study committee. Let's talk about Senate Bill 202, and then decide if there's anything in this bill we want to carry over. Thank you.
Thank you. A couple that we missed early on, Hannah Gabrielisi. Gabra Selassie. See, I knew it was there. Hello. Please. Thank you.
Gebra Selassie.
Thank you.
Yes. Good evening, committee. It's great to be in the presence of so many passionate Georgians who care about our voting rights today. My name is Hannah Joy Geber Selassie, and I serve as the Executive Director of Protect the Vote. But beyond that, I'm a proud Georgian, a product of DeKalb County and Gwinnett County. And today I'm here to let you all know that we would like to oppose House Bill 1464 and urge you all to do the right thing to protect our voting rights for the future of Georgians across this state. There are several concerns that I have, along with many other Georgians, that relate to this bill. And to start off, I'd like to, of course, echo some of the points that were brought up today, including from Section 15, third-party election audits. We understand that Georgia does not have an election fraud problem, yet here we are trying to enforce additional measures that are unnecessary, that may create additional barriers, would create a lengthier process to get those election results back, when we know that Georgians deserve quick and accurate election results. Section 17, which expands jurisdiction of Georgia Bureau of Investigation to elections. We do not need the GBI creating additional voter intimidation. We do not need this we don't need this excessive use of force to enter our election system, when we know that there are other ways that we can address concerns that the community has. We recognize that there are fears in the community, particularly around the GBI, coming into their homes, into their offices, into their spaces, their safe spaces. We also know, again, that Georgia does not have a problem with election fraud. I'm gonna say that one more time. Georgia does not have a problem with election fraud. We've heard countless officials. We've seen people investigate this thoroughly to come up with this analysis. Now, along with this, I want to echo some of the concerns, again, brought up by fellow Georgians that I myself have. Reducing the amount of machines in our communities. We know that this could create longer lines. We already know that our centers are under-resourced, understaffed. One person brought up some concerns around this bill and the impacts it may have on our neighbors with disabilities. Again, in Section 4, the reduction of voting machines, what those lines could look like with people who already have disabilities that are trying to vote. Reducing grants that are coming in to support our Board of Elections. We've heard so many people here today addressing the fact that they need more support, not less support. So how do we come together to support our Board of Elections across the state of Georgia? Another area that we see, counting hundreds of pieces of paper. I've never done that in my life. I will be fully transparent about that. And I don't think anybody in this room has. I don't think anyone should have to do that. It's an unnecessary task. And who is going to be responsible for paying for those hours of those additional staff? Today, I urge you to vote no on House Bill 1464. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. Thank you for your input. Mr. Madden, Jordan Madden, is Mr. Madden with us this evening? One more survivor. One more survivor. Last call, going once. I guess going twice and third time. Okay. First of all, let me say thank you. I appreciate your input. Oh, sorry.
I didn't know there was a list.
No, there is a list. And they're not on our list, but it's 1 o'clock and you didn't know there was a list? All right, the chair will allow 3 minutes for the lady who's been here since 1 o'clock.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, I need a name and an
So
organization.
my name is Heather Mullins, and I'm actually an investigative reporter, and I cover election stuff. So I'm not here to necessarily talk about my investigative stuff. I'm here to talk about your bill, which
Please do. Please do.
Yeah. So one of the big things in it specifically that actually was just mentioned, the counting of paper. I can actually say I used to work for a bank and we used to audit the vaults and count hundreds of thousands of dollars. And there's technology that you can use to actually count paper in a matter of seconds. We also, as far as chain of custody, if you look at ATMs the same way you would look at drop boxes, chain of custody, if we were to run our elections like you run a bank, we wouldn't have the issues that we had in this last election. Secondly, as far as the GBI goes, I think the more people that are allowed to examine our elections, the better, because it creates checks and balances. And I know I personally have evidence of illegal ballot harvesting on my phone that I could show you right now, videos that we've obtained through open records requests. If the laws you guys passed are not enforced, then your job is basically rendered obsolete. And so if these election laws and the evidence fall on deaf ears, like let's say the Secretary of State's office, the GBI can then conduct their own investigation. And so it creates checks and balances. Same for if the GBI does not do their job, the Secretary of State should be allowed to do their own investigation. So the more investigations we have, the better, because ultimately everyone's vote should count. I don't care what party people are from. Fundamentally, like, our election process is the most sacred thing for our country, and it needs to be run with a level of professionalism. And the other thing I'm going to comment on is the outside money. One of the problems with that I found as a journalist seeking answers is that when you delegate powers that should be the election officials running our election to nonprofit groups, the money in Wisconsin, right? A lot of those contracts, when the counties accepted that money, it came with provisions that said, if you spend this money, this is what you have to do. This is how you have to spend it. If you want to hire an outside cybersecurity company, we have to approve it. So the people running these nonprofit groups are actually dictating how the election gets run. And in those same contracts, it actually said, if you don't do what we want, you have to give every penny of that money back. So this is basically transferring the responsibility to run the elections from the people that were appointed or elected to these nonprofit groups. And then when I, as a reporter, want to do open records requests for things like emails, if I want to, create a level of accountability and transparency, I can't do that for these nonprofits the way I can election boards that are beholden to the people and the voters. So I would recommend that as far as this nonprofit money, if they're going to be, and I think funding for our elections is so important, but it needs to be done through the government and through taxpayers, not through these outside sources, because that would be, whether you're Republican or Democrat, we should not be allowing our elections to be bought and paid for. And it's so incredibly important, because we're all going to pay the price if we put a price tag on our elections, and it shouldn't be sold. So.
Thank you for your input.
Thank you. And I'm happy to send you guys the videos and information from my investigation, just so you.
Again, this is.
Because your job is so
investigative.
important, so.
Yes, we're a legislative body, not an investigative body. It is the hour of completion is approaching. It's 7:09. Again, I want to thank those of you who came and endured and provided your input. We received 46 input testimonies from people in the room and another 7 from via Zoom. That's 53. So thank you for your input. This is a complex and challenging issue. We know that, we understand that, and we're working through this. I want to especially thank the Dean of the Senate, Senator Harbison, Senator Vitarte, Senator Harrell, Senator Jones. They have a true interest in doing what is right for you, and I'm grateful for their service. I also have to acknowledge Keelan Cronin. Keelan's been here. She's our Senate Research Assistant, and Stuart Morelli, who is our legal counsel. So they have been here the whole time, folks. They've been here the whole time so they could listen to your input, and I appreciate them, okay? Quick announcement. We're approaching deadline to complete all committee work by Wednesday. So there will be a meeting of this committee tomorrow afternoon at 5 o'clock. It will have the potential, I stress potential, to take action on 3 pieces of legislation. HR 842, which is Representative Cantrell's bill, that's House Resolution HR 842, Representative Cantrell's bill, HB 923, that is Representative Oliver's bill, and then HB 1464 that we've been hearing today. So those 3 have the potential for having action taken tomorrow at 5 o'clock. I would suggest it would not be nearly as long as this session if we were on the same page. Okay. Any other business that needs to come before the committee? Seeing none. Thank you for being here. I wish you a peaceful and restful night. Meeting is adjourned.